Hey, it's me. Thanks for checking out this compilation. I wasn't sure if anyone was going to like these, but people seem to enjoy them, so that helps because we're off for 2 more weeks. And yes, Jen and I took a couple of days off. That explains the sunburn. I hadn't seen the sun in a couple of... Sorry about this. Hello?
Hello. I'm waiting in the studio to do the compilation stuff, but you're not here.
Yeah, I told you...
No. Nobody likes a tardy human.
I'm not tardy. I just didn't have time to set up the lights and the camera and all.
Oh, it seems like you have enough time to make excuses.
The point is...
I just want to be included.
Well, you're included now. I'll leave this whole conversation in the compilation.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Tell them about the new heckle kicks, the Wi-Fi sneakers.
We're not plugging merch now.
But...
No, that's not what this is for.
Fine.
Okay.
But the sneakers are really cool.
Okay, so the first episode is the Silurian hypothesis. And this was video number 43. So Silurian hypothesis questions whether there was an advanced civilization on Earth before us. And if there was, can we prove it?
The lizard people episode.
Yes.
No, this one makes my dorsal fin tingle.
Okay, enough of that.
3 + 1 5 + 0 0.
There are over 7 billion people living on the Earth right now. Tens of millions are born and die each year. Every single one of us leaves signs of our existence in the air, water, soil, even space. But these signs won't last forever. Our buildings will be gone in a few hundred years. Our stone monuments, plastic, styrofoam, Twinkies, even evidence of our inevitable nuclear destruction will eventually be gone. So how can we be sure that we were the first advanced civilization on Earth? Well, according to the Silurian hypothesis, we can't. Let's find out why. Let's talk about the Silurian hypothesis.
What the hell is a Silurian?
Well, they were intelligent humanoid reptilians who, in an episode of Doctor Who, were awakened by nuclear testing after 400 million years of hibernation.
Lizard people?
Yep.
We're finally doing a lizard people episode.
We are. Well, kinda. Humans are selfish. It's hard for us to imagine that in a very short time, we as individuals won't be here. And it's even harder to imagine a time where our civilization won't exist at all. But if we learned anything from archaeology, it's that every civilization has its time. Think about ancient Egypt. They lived 30 dynasties that spanned over 3,000 years. And if you were an Egyptian living during this time, generations of your family, going back as far as anyone can remember, walked in the shadow of the pyramids. They fished the Nile, they sailed the Mediterranean, mingled with other cultures. As far as you or anyone knew, your civilization had been there and would last forever. Then it was gone. The Mesopotamians before them, the Indus after them, Greeks, Nubians, the Persians, Romans, Incas, Aztecs. These were empires of millions of people, all lasting 1,000 years or more, but very little evidence of them remains. Now, all of these civilizations, including our own modern one, have only been here for a short time. Complex life has existed for hundreds of millions of years. Modern humans have only been here for about 100,000 years. Our entire history has taken place in the past 0.002% of life on Earth. So there's a whole lot of past in the past. And that's plenty of time for other intelligent species to evolve, thrive, and go extinct over and over again with different species. And if that happened, would we really know they were here? When Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt wrote the Silurian hypothesis, they addressed a lot of misconceptions about how we study the past. We're used to the idea that we learn of ancient societies by examining artifacts and excavated ruins. But this really only works if you're going back a few thousand years. And when you want to go back millions of years, it's more complicated. For example, the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and complex life appeared about 600 million years ago. Fine. But the oldest surface land ever discovered is the Negev Desert in Israel. It's about 1.8 million years old. That's it. Every other piece of exposed land we've ever found is newer than that. So, where'd all the land go? If ancient civilizations existed before humans, they could be very hard to detect. Because of the Earth's plate tectonics, today's mountains are yesterday's ocean floor. New land is formed every day as old lands are eroded into dust. That's why discovering fossils is a lot more difficult than people think. Very specific conditions need to be present for fossilization. The organism needs hard body parts like bones, teeth, and shells. The remains need to be quickly covered and protected from scavenging and erosion. You need high pressure for mineralization and low oxygen to prevent decomposition. This almost never happens. Dinosaurs roamed the Earth for about 180 million years. Trillions of individual animals lived and died, yet we only have a few thousand near-complete fossils. It's estimated that over 2.5 billion Tyrannosaurus rexes lived and died on the Earth, but fewer than 100 fossils have ever been found, and only one of them is complete. That means we've only discovered 0.0000004% of the species. Now, Schmidt and Frank said that a species as short-lived as Homo sapiens might not be represented in the existing fossil record at all. Now, the current area of urbanization is less than 1% of the Earth's surface. So human artifacts like roads, cities, machines, even megastructures would last only a few thousand years and are unlikely to ever be found. They conclude that direct evidence like this can only go back about 4 million years. Even if the entire human race were eliminated by a nuclear war, the radioactive evidence would disappear eventually. So, are there other methods for detecting the existence of advanced intelligent life in the distant past? Turns out there are. Civilization, at least as defined by the authors of the Silurian hypothesis, is where industrialization occurs on a global scale, as ours does. Now, as we speak, industrialization is leaving clues of our existence that will be detectable by scientists 100 million years in the future. Now, eventually, our time on Earth will be crushed down to nothing more than a thin layer of rock sediment.
Yeah, that's uplifting.
Now, in a sedimentary core, a layer of a few centimeters is deposited every 1,000 years. And in those centimeters, future paleontologists will find evidence of our geologic era called the Anthropocene. Now, for example, we grow so much food now that our use of fertilizer is actually redirecting the planet's nitrogen supply. And this nitrogen cycling is also changing its isotopic signature. And this isotope will be detectable in the sediment. Agriculture and deforestation increase soil erosion, and that erosion washes into the sea and becomes part of the sediment. Now, human mining activities have increased the amounts of gold, lead, chromium, platinum, and other metals, and these also will be visible in the sediment at greater rates than before. But the element that will really tell the story of civilization is carbon. Humans conquered the planet by harnessing combustion, and it seems reasonable that intelligent life forms everywhere would do the same thing. When we burn the tissue of long-dead plants, fossil fuels, we change the ratio of isotopes in the atmosphere, and this is called the Seuss effect.
The green omelet guy?
Different Seuss.
Yeah.
Carbon comes in 15 flavors, but the most common isotopes are carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. Carbon-12 is light carbon. This is the isotope preferred by plants and used during photosynthesis. And animals that eat plants consume the plant's carbon-12. And animals that eat plants consume their carbon-12, and so on. Now, volcanic emissions are carbon-13. Carbon-14 is radioactive and decays predictably over time. Fossil fuels have no carbon-14 at all. And as we burn more fossil fuels, the levels of carbon-13 and 14 go down, while the level of enriched carbon-12 goes up. All this carbon in the atmosphere also causes the Earth to warm slightly.
Blech.
What?
Global warming is a myth.
It's not.
Sheep.
Look, you can argue that the warming is man-made or that it's not, but either way, we're up about a degree.
Bleh, bleh.
Anyway, when looking through sedimentary layers from millions of years ago, this is what we need to see to determine if there was advanced civilization present. We need to see a large but temporary spike in carbon and oxygen, a large but temporary spike in metals, and a large but temporary spike in global temperature. We find that? We're onto something.
Have we found that? Have we?
We have, and it happened 56 million years ago.
The age of the lizard people.
A sudden global change of carbon and oxygen isotope levels happened 56 million years ago in what's known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM. And the PETM only lasted about 200,000 years. Now that's nothing in geologic time. But remember, That's as long as we've been here. And during this time, the PETM, the Earth's temperature rose about 6 degrees Celsius. Now that was warm. I mean, we're talking t-shirt weather at the North Pole warm. I mean, the ice caps were completely gone.
Lizard people do like warm weather.
What?
Lizard people are cold-blooded. Hello? Read a science book.
There were no lizard people.
Bleh.
So is the PETM evidence of an ancient civilization?
Yep.
Probably not.
Bleh.
It took 5,000 years to reach the level of carbon in the atmosphere that we've done in only 300 years.
So what caused it?
Nobody knows.
Aha!
The best guess is the PETM was caused by a massive volcanic eruption, but nobody knows for sure. What's weird, though, is there is evidence of a lot of fossil carbon in the atmosphere.
Lizard people gas stations.
And a few million years later, these conditions happened again. And this event is called the Eocene Layers of Mysterious Origin.
Sounds like the name of a Harry Potter book.
It does. And there were other massive events in the Cretaceous period that depleted the Earth's oceans of oxygen for thousands of years. Now, to be honest, most scientists believe that we are the first civilization, but they do admit that if an advanced species only existed for as long as we have, they would be really hard to detect. Even the authors of the Silurian hypothesis admit if you're not specifically looking at the right time in history and for the right details, you'll probably miss it. But the Silurian hypothesis does give us an interesting set of tools. Tools that might not help us find ancient civilizations on our planet, but could help us find them on other planets. The Drake equation is a well-known formula for estimating the number of extraterrestrial civilizations in our galaxy. It boils down to the number of stars that have planets, the number of planets that can support life, the fraction of those planets that develop life, and the fraction of those that can develop intelligent life. Now, this number fluctuates as new discoveries are made, but still, the number of civilizations out there could be anywhere from 150,000 to 1.5 billion.
Even if it's just more than one, it would be so cool.
So cool. What's interesting is, now that we had the Silurian hypothesis, any planet that can develop intelligent life can maybe develop it again and again over millions or billions of years. And that was the original premise of Frankenschmidt's paper. They wondered not only about life on other planets in the galaxy, but about civilizations that may have existed right here in our solar system. At one time, Mars was much wetter and much warmer. So was Venus. One of Jupiter's moons, Europa, is covered by a saltwater ocean. And when we finally get core samples from these planets, we may realize that though civilizations don't exist there right now, the distant past could tell a very different story. Now, the authors of the Silurian hypothesis don't believe there were ancient civilizations on Earth before humans, and our civilization may be unique in the universe, but they do lay out an exciting possibility that there could be millions of civilizations out there, and now we have the tools to find them. All right, next up is episode 64, Operation High Jump. And this is the one that I think sort of launched the channel. Because before this, I had been averaging about maybe 1,500 views per video for almost 2 years. It was, if you watched my video last New Year's, it was very disappointing, very disheartening to work so hard and nobody was watching. But Operation High Jump, for some reason, got 50,000 views that first day, and I couldn't believe it. And from there, the channel just sort of steadily grew. Anyway, it's a fun episode, and I try to really put you in the cockpit of Admiral Byrd's plane as he flies into that hole into the South Pole. And I don't want to spoil too much in case you haven't seen it, but what he finds under there is pretty crazy, and it's become a bit of a legend. But is it true?
3+15+00.
Operation High Jump commenced in August 1946. It was the largest, most heavily armed naval task force ever sent to Antarctica. Leading the mission was Admiral Richard E. Byrd, one of the most famous naval officers in history. The official purpose for the expedition was scientific research and military training. But that was just a cover story. Operation High Jump had other goals. One was to extend American sovereignty over Antarctica, something that was denied many times by the US government. Another was to locate and destroy a secret Nazi base and capture the Nazis' new secret weapon, the flying saucer. UFOs were seen all over the area, suspected to be Nazi test flights. Admiral Byrd was sent to find out.
Did they find flying saucers?
Oh, they found a lot more than that. In December 1938, aware that he was on the brink of war, Hitler dedicated considerable resources to searching for mysterious ancient artifacts said to have incredible power. One of these expeditions launched on December 17, 1938. The SS Schwabenland was sent on a secret mission to Antarctica. On board were scientists and engineers, but also members of the Thule Society, a German occultist group. The Thule Society believed that a highly advanced race of human-like beings called Aryans existed somewhere deep inside the Earth, and the entrance to their world was at the South Pole. The classified mission of the SS Schwabenland was to find a location for a secret underground base and make contact with the Aryans living in the Hollow Earth. And once contact was made, negotiate for access to their technology. The ship reached the Antarctic coast a month later. For the next 3 weeks, they mapped hundreds of thousands of square miles of the continent. About 150 miles inland, aerial reconnaissance found what is described as an Arctic oasis, an area about 300 square miles that was free of ice, filled with warm water, and even contained plant life. In the ocean beneath the oasis was a geothermal vent that kept the area relatively warm. This was the ideal place for a base, especially for U-boats. This is where the Nazis would establish the infamous underground facility known as Base 211. Over the course of World War II, Base 211 became a massive complex, as large as a small city. Initially, it was designed as an offensive structure, where U-boats and missiles could be deployed. But as the tide of war turned against the Axis powers, it became clear that the base would be an ideal way to escape. In the final months of the war, huge amounts of equipment, supplies, and personnel were transported to Antarctica. At the same time, thousands of Nazis escaped justice and were smuggled to South America, with most of them hiding in Argentina. One of the infamous German officers to disappear was Hans Kammler. Kammler was in charge of Hitler's secret weapons program. Kammler's engineers had created a prototype long-distance supply plane with a range of over 4,000 miles called the Ju-390. Only 2 of these were made. One of them belonged to Kammler. And as of April 1945, neither Kammler nor his plane have ever been found. And just a few months later, thousands of UFO sightings were reported all over South America. The American government feared that Kammler and his scientists had escaped to Antarctica, where they were continuing their work, operating out of a secret military base hidden deep underground. But these were just rumors. There was only one way to find out. Go to Antarctica. Okay, before we talk about what Admiral Byrd saw in Antarctica...
No, come on, just get to the weird stuff.
I will, but it's important that you understand what kind of man Richard Byrd was. He was not some pseudoscience conspiracy theorist kook. He was a legitimate badass. Here are the bullet points. Richard Byrd reached the rank of Rear Admiral by the age of 41, the youngest admiral in Navy history. Now that by itself is impressive. But how about this? He was a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, the Flying Cross, and the Silver Life-Saving Medal. In all, he received 22 citations and commendations, including 9 for bravery and 2 for extraordinary heroism. He was, to this day, one of the most highly decorated officers in the history of the Navy. Now, his resume goes on, but I think you get the point. If Admiral Byrd says he wants to be the first man to fly over the North Pole, he does it. And if the United States sends a major expedition to the South Pole to conduct a top-secret mission, well, there's no more qualified person on the face of the Earth to lead it than Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Operation High Jump commenced in August 1946. The official purpose of the mission was to train personnel and test equipment in cold temperatures, to explore Arctic geology, study the weather, and develop techniques for establishing air bases in frigid climates. Admiral Byrd led a Navy task force of almost 5,000 men aboard 13 ships, including a brand new state-of-the-art aircraft carrier loaded with dozens of planes, bombers, and helicopters. This task force was armed to the teeth. There were 2 destroyers, tankers, supply ships, icebreakers, 2 heavily armed seaplanes, and an attack submarine, all fully stocked with the best weapons in the entire Navy.
That's a lot of firepower for training exercises and studying the weather.
Right? That mission was the cover story. No personnel training or equipment testing ever took place. No practice maneuvers, no military exercises, no scientific study of any kind was ever done. According to eyewitness testimony, declassified records, and Bird's own journal, Operation High Jump had other purposes. One goal was to extend American sovereignty over the Antarctic continent, something that was denied many times publicly by the US government.
Naturally.
The other goal was to locate and destroy the secret Nazi military complex known as Base 211, and to capture any flying saucers they could. The Armada arrived on January 15th and immediately started building a base called Little America. But then the Operation High Jump story takes a turn. Originally meant to be a 6 to 8 month mission, after just 40 days, the base is evacuated and the task force withdraws. This massive, expensive, and important mission is suddenly terminated. So, what happened? And this is where Admiral Byrd, a legend in his own time, becomes a legend for all time. The Navy task force retreated to Chile, and as soon as they made port, rumors spread about strange findings and disasters that forced the mission to be cut short. Admiral Byrd himself spoke to the media, and rather than deny the stories, he expressed deep concern about the real possibilities of devastating aerial attacks on the US.
This doesn't sound like a guy on a scientific mission.
It sure doesn't. Byrd warned that it was imperative for the United States to take immediate defensive measures against hostile forces in the Arctic and Antarctic. The admiral went on to say that he wasn't trying to alarm anyone.
Too late.
But the cruel reality is that in case of a new war, the United States could be attacked by flying objects that had the ability to move from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Admiral Byrd reiterated this in a few different statements. He warned that there was a new enemy that could attack any country at any time, anywhere, no matter the distance. When Admiral Byrd got back to Washington, he was immediately debriefed. And though he had just spent 2 weeks making statements in the press, after a lengthy interrogation, Admiral Byrd never uttered another word about Operation High Jump. The mission was immediately classified top secret, and any sailor who spoke about the mission would be arrested and imprisoned. The Navy then published a brief summary of the mission's achievements and admitted some sailors were killed, but they didn't say how many. And officially, all the deaths were accidents, and the bodies were buried there, not brought home. During one of his flights, Admiral Byrd was missing for 3 hours in an episode of lost time, but that was officially blamed on radio failure. The official reason for terminating the mission early was poor weather conditions, and that was that. However, you know how Admiral Byrd was missing for 3 hours and experienced lost time?
Yeah.
Well, Byrd was meticulous at documenting everything. But when he returned to the States, his journals were confiscated and classified. But the government didn't get everything. He had a secret diary that he gave to his son right before he died. And if any of what he claims to have seen is true, well, it changes everything. According to Admiral Byrd's diary, he fuels up for a flight early in the morning. The weather is clear, and mechanically, the plane checks out. At 8:15, at an altitude of 2,300 feet, he checks in.
0815 hours. Radio check with base camp. Situation normal.
At 10 after 9, he notices a color pattern in the snow. Nothing extreme, but he circles the area to get a closer look. He makes visual contact with camp and radios in his findings. Then, his instruments start to act strange. He writes that both his compasses are gyrating so much that he can't even use them. So he uses the sun to navigate and maintains a visual of camp. He reports that his controls are feeling sluggish. He's concerned about the wings icing up. There's a little ice, but no indication of a problem, so he continues flying toward what he perceives as a mountain range.
0949 hours. 29 minutes elapsed flight time from the first sighting of the mountains. It is no illusion. They are mountains and consisting of a small range that I have never seen before.
He crosses the mountain range and descends toward what he describes as a green valley with a small river running through it.
There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth.
He drops down a bit and circles back for a closer look. He reports the green as being moss or tight grass. The light seems different here. He can see the ground easily, but he can no longer see the sun. Now, this starts to worry him because he's using the sun to navigate, But he gets distracted by something he didn't expect. On the green valley below, a large animal is grazing.
It appears to be an elephant. No, it looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible, yet there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed. It is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp.
Admiral Byrd flies over green pastures that stretch for miles, and he's so amazed by what he's seeing, it takes him almost 30 minutes to realize it's not cold anymore. Frost on his forward window is gone. Same with the bits of ice that were on the wings. He removes his gloves. The window of the canopy is warm to the touch. He records an external air temperature of 74 degrees Fahrenheit. His instruments are now back online, but his radio is out. And remember, in the official report, Admiral Byrd was out of radio contact for 3 hours. So he flies for another hour over what looks to be a countryside or a pasture. On the horizon, he sees the impossible, a large, shining city. The plane shudders. Admiral Byrd grabs the controls, but they're not responding. He notices the plane feels light and buoyant. Then, on both sides of the plane, strange aircraft are rapidly closing in. They're disc-shaped and seem to be radiating light, and somehow they're running completely silent. Now, thinking this is now a really good time to head back, Admiral Byrd tries the controls again. No luck. The plane's engine suddenly cuts out, but somehow continues flying, controlled by some unseen force. The craft are right up alongside his plane now, close enough that Admiral Byrd can see markings. In that instant, his wonder turns to terror. The markings are swastikas. According to documents leaked in 1991, things back at Camp Little America take a strange turn. Just 2 days after arriving, bright lights were seen on the horizon. The sailors thought it was another ship, but they were below the Antarctic Circle in uncharted waters. The lights then ascended at a 45-degree angle into the sky very quickly. They tried to make radar contact, but were out of range. 3 hours later, 5 more lights appeared in the sky and began flying directly toward the ships. Anti-aircraft guns and 20mm cannons were fired but had no effect. A radio operator stationed on the USS Brownson gave testimony of how strange craft suddenly appeared from the ocean. And this is corroborated by Lieutenant John Sayerson, who said objects shot vertically out of the water at tremendous speeds. One object flew between the masts of his ship with such force that the radio antenna oscillated back and forth from the turbulence. An aircraft from the USS Currituck took to the sky but was immediately struck by a beam of energy and destroyed. About 10 miles away, the torpedo boat USS Maddox burst into flames and began to sink. According to the report, this was the first attack of several that would occur over the next few weeks. February 26 would be the last engagement with the unknown craft. The Navy task force ordered retreat and left the area, a full 6 months before their mission was supposed to end. Although Lieutenant Sayerson couldn't identify the lights, he wondered if they were what he called German wonder weapons, being operated by survivors of the recently defeated Third Reich, operating out of a secret base under Antarctica. His testimony has fueled speculation that still exists, and to this day, investigators are trying to determine what really happened during Operation High Jump. Admiral Byrd's radio, which hadn't been working for at least an hour, suddenly comes back to life. Though the signal was distorted, a voice starts speaking English with a slightly German accent.
Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral, you are in good hands.
The plane gently lands itself, and Admiral Byrd is met by several men, all tall with blonde hair.
Aryans?
Sounds like it. Byrd joins the strangers on a platform that levitates and rushes them toward the city at great speed. He's directed to an elevator that takes him quickly and silently deep underground. He is to have an audience with the Master. Admiral Byrd is led into another room where an older man is seated at a long table. Admiral Byrd is asked to sit down. The Master says his people are called the Ariani, and they've been observing humans for a long time, but only now are they choosing to interfere. The Master says that Admiral Byrd's race is too immature for atomic energy and are at risk of destroying themselves. The Master says every time they try to make contact, their ships are fired upon and pursued by fighter planes. So instead, they chose Admiral Byrd to carry this message. Because he's a famous and well-respected figure, the master hopes that the world will believe him. After the meeting, the admiral is escorted back to his plane. And after flying for a few minutes, a voice comes through the radio that control of the aircraft is now his. A voice says, "Auf Wiedersehen," and disconnects.
Definitely Aryans.
When Admiral Byrd arrives at the Pentagon in March 1947, he is debriefed and interrogated for hours. He relays the message from the master and advises the president. He's ordered to remain silent about the operation, and indeed, Admiral Richard E. Byrd never spoke a word about this mission again. The final entry in his diary is a number of years later. Admiral Byrd feels what he calls the long night coming, but doesn't want this knowledge to die with him.
Just as the long night of the Arctic ends, the brilliant sunshine of truth shall come again. And those who are of darkness shall fall in its light, for I have seen that land beyond the pole, that center of the great unknown. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, United States Navy, 24th of December, 1956.
And Admiral Byrd passed away 3 months later. This secret diary was found by his son, Richard Byrd Jr., and subsequently released, as was his father's wish. And 18 months after that, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, forbidding anyone from going to Antarctica without special permission from one of 12 signatory governments. And even with special permission, you may only go in a few small designated areas. Antarctica is bigger than Europe, bigger than Australia, bigger than the entire United States. Yet all that land is off limits. Why? Was there a secret Nazi base? Is there a civilization living underground? The UFOs described by the sailors in 1947 behave an awful lot like UFOs we're seeing right now. Since we can't go to their world, they could be trying to come to us, with the same warning they gave Admiral Byrd. So maybe instead of trying to destroy these craft and destroy each other, we might want to listen to what they have to say. And who knows? The entire fate of the world may depend on it. Okay, talk about a story having it all. UFOs, Nazi bases, government cover-ups, even Hollow Earth. And I've done a lot of research on Hollow Earth, so if you want to see that video, let me know in the comments. Anyway, I'll tell you right up front, there's a lot of the story that can be debunked, but not all of it. Let's start with Admiral Byrd's secret diary. It's not real. First of all, the flight in the diary takes place in the North Pole, so we're already off to a rocky start since Antarctica is as far south as you can get. And some of the log entries are almost identical to actual published log entries from the Admiral. The same types of instrument failures, engine issues show up in both places for some reason. Also, whole paragraphs of what the master said to Admiral Byrd seem to be plagiarized from the 1937 film Lost Horizon, where the main character is talking to the Dalai Lama who issues the same kind of warning. In 1964, a book about the Hollow Earth was released by Walter Siegmeister under the pen name Raymond Bernard. Admiral Byrd is mentioned quite a bit in the book. Bernard went on to write lots of books about UFOs and Hollow Earth, and later, when Byrd's secret diary appeared, guess who wrote the foreword? Yep, Raymond Bernard. But the dead giveaway for me? The secret diary is full of exclamation points. Like, lots of them. If you read any of Byrd's other logs, no matter how excited he gets, he doesn't write like he's posting on Reddit. He writes like a gentleman. So, what about the Nazis? Here's where it gets tricky. The Schwabenland did go to Antarctica in 1938, but its mission was to secure new ports for whaling to supply Germany with its own whale oil for margarine.
Whoa. A Nazi mission to the South Pole for a delicious buttery spread?
Exactly. Germany wasn't at war yet, but Hitler was planning it. A lot of oil and fat-based products were imported. Hitler wanted to make sure that these industries could continue and his army could be fed in case foreign supplies were cut off. The Nazi mission did claim some land for Germany, and it's widely thought that they did look for a location for a base and maybe even tried to build one, but no evidence of a base has been found. However, Nazi artifacts have been found in the Arctic, in the north, which could be why this story continues to circulate. But so far, nothing in the south.
Could be underground.
It could be. I'm not saying nothing's there, I'm just saying we haven't found it yet.
Or they found it and aren't telling anybody.
Well, that's always a possibility. The US government did lie about the real purpose of Operation High Jump. And it's true Admiral Byrd never spoke about it publicly, except for those cryptic comments in the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio. El Mercurio is a real paper, and Admiral Byrd did give them an interview. Obviously, the article was released in Spanish, but when it was translated back to English, his words were twisted around to make the story sound more dramatic.
Never let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Right. Byrd never said there are ships that can fly pole to pole at tremendous speeds. He said the United States could be attacked by planes coming from the poles, and it should be ready for that. And Operation High Jump had a press contingent, about a dozen reporters giving daily reports. There really wasn't much going on, so rather than send back a 3-word story, lots of ice, the reporters added their own flair. For example, Byrd did find a small lake that had uniquely warm temperatures with algae growing in it, but it was reported as a land of blue and green lakes and brown hills in an otherwise limitless expanse of ice.
And the UFO attack?
Right. In 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, millions of secret documents were released. And one of those, written in 1947, was a description of Operation High Jump. And in 2006, a Russian documentary was released based on that secret intelligence report. The Soviets did believe that Operation High Jump was a mission to find and destroy a Nazi base. And look, with all that firepower, I don't think that's a stretch. The reports of the battle with UFOs comes from the Soviet documents. But it's iffy on the facts, and they got some of the names of the ships wrong. But they did get some right. And the US military has a history of changing a ship's name and rewriting the ship's story if it serves Navy policy.
Propaganda.
Always. The Soviet report said that UFOs weren't trying to destroy the American ships, which they easily could have done. They just wanted the ships to turn back. The mission was cut way short. The official reason for that is weather. But that's a lot of resources wasted because of weather. Were there really UFOs protecting something down there? Or is this disinformation deliberately leaked to the Soviets by US intelligence? I don't know. I've debunked as much as I can for you. Even though a lot of the story is false, not all of it is. And it seems as the only way we'll get answers is to go to Antarctica. But if there's one thing that every government in the world agrees on, it's that whatever is down there needs to stay there. But I'll leave you with these final thoughts. Just a few months after Operation High Jump, a UFO allegedly crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. The location of the crash is only a few miles from the world's first nuclear explosion. And Admiral Byrd did go missing for 3 hours and arrived back at camp 3 hours late. He was in a small, short-range airplane, so why didn't he run out of fuel? I still enjoy that one. I love the sequence of the airplane when he's flying through the hole in the South Pole, but I still kind of cringe at it because I'd love to redo that whole thing. I can make it so much better. Our production has come a long way since then. Anyway, next up is the story of Paul Benowitz, Richard Doty, Phil Schneider, the Dulce underground base. And this was episode 85. And this was about the time where I started kind of really going after the intelligence community. Not like the guys and gals that are out there keeping us safe. We love those people. I mean the shadow government, the shadow intelligence, the people that keep the UFO information from us. Now, I don't know what they know, but I know they know something. So this was the episode that touches on really all the intertwining stories and how they created this disinformation campaign that really threw a monkey wrench into the entire UFO community, at which I still think that community has not recovered from it yet. Now, I don't want to say this is a super dark episode, but we do get pretty serious. Either way, it's a wild one.
3+15+00.
Everyone's heard of Area 51, the top secret facility in the Nevada desert. But nobody really knows what happens there. We have only rumors. One rumor is that alien bodies have been recovered from UFO crashes. Those aliens have been autopsied and the subjects of medical experiments for years. But have you ever heard of Dulce Base? Dulce is more secret than Area 51 and more sinister. If Area 51 is the place where humans experiment on aliens, Dulce is the place where aliens experiment on us. Dulce is a town in New Mexico near the Colorado border on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. Though the town is small, with fewer than 3,000 people, the area has the largest number of UFO sightings per capita in the world. The stories of strange lights and objects in the sky go back as far as the first people to inhabit the area thousands of years ago. Newer stories claim there's an underground base within the Archuleta Mesa near Dulce. Though there's never been hard evidence of this base, there are quite a few people who've come forward over the years that indicate something is happening in the area. There are witnesses who claim to have worked on the construction of the base, worked at the base, and some who've seen it from the air. There are even people who have claimed to have seen the base from the inside after being taken there against their will. In 1975, a rancher in Dulce called the police in a panic. One of his cattle had been killed. At first, he thought it was a predator, but predators don't do this. Officer Gabe Valdez responded to the call. He couldn't believe what he found. The cow was drained of all its blood and had undergone a procedure where many of its organs were surgically removed. And around the cow's carcass were tracks in the soil that looked like they came from the feet of a tripod. Next to each of the tracks, the ground was scorched, indicating there was an aircraft that could take off and land vertically. In the tracks, there was a yellow, oily substance that couldn't be identified by any lab. It seemed as if the tripods, whatever they were, followed the cow for about 600 feet. Valdez was able to see where the cow had struggled before this happened. Valdez knew this was a little outside of his lane, so he contacted Dr. Howard Burgess of Sandia National Labs. Dr. Burgess arrived 72 hours later to assist. Though 3 days had passed, the cow wasn't decomposing, and predators and scavengers wouldn't go near it. And at some point during those 3 days, one of the cow's ears was removed. Over the following months, 17 animals would be killed this way. All were missing their lymph nodes, all were missing multiple organs, and all taken surgically. All the animals were drained of blood, and the little blood that remained wouldn't clot, not even after several days. Soon, investigators started to become sick. 7 people who visited the ranch complained about headaches and nausea. This gave Dr. Burgess the idea to test radiation levels in the area, and radiation was twice what it should be. And during this time, investigators working at night saw orange lights moving silently in the sky. Investigators working during the day saw black helicopters circling overhead. Valdez wondered if this was more than a local phenomenon. He looked for cases of animal mutilation in the surrounding areas, and over the course of a few years, an estimated 8,000 animal mutilations were reported. Now, I was able to find the official FBI report on this, which I'll link below. And despite everything I've told you about the condition of these animals, the FBI said, quote, "It was consistent with predator action, and there is no federal interest in continuing an investigation."
The only predator that can do this is the predator.
What predator is that?
Oh, you know, from the movies, with the face like a scungeel.
Funny you bring that up. Where was that predator from?
Another planet?
Well,
Oh, if it bleeds, we can kill it!
Paul Benowitz was born in 1927, and when World War II broke out, he joined the Coast Guard as a teenager. He had a master's degree in physics and was pursuing his PhD when he opened an electronics company in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Paul Benowitz's primary clients were the Air Force and NASA. He did so much business with the Air Force that he actually bought a home and established a lab right next to Kirtland Air Force Base. And we have an entire episode that covers him and how he was misled and abused by the United States government. Link below. Kirtland Air Force Base is a massive complex spanning over 80 square miles. Over 20,000 people work on the base. Kirtland also happens to be the largest storage facility for nuclear weapons in the Western Hemisphere. On the grounds are the Manzano Mountains, and under the Manzanos are 80 underground bunkers, including a presidential emergency shelter. Connecting the bunkers are over 40 separate tunnels, though nobody knows for sure how many. The people who built the facility were not allowed to tell anyone about what they were working on. Paul Benowitz was a gifted engineer and was interested in UFOs. From Paul's second-floor balcony, he observed and filmed strange lights in the sky. He also recorded radio transmissions that seemed to be alien in origin. Paul occasionally worked for several UFO groups, including the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization known as APRO. And even though UFO research wasn't yet mainstream, APRO was a respected organization known for scientifically grounded research. In 1979, Paul attended a conference in Albuquerque where he met Officer Gabe Valdez. They traded stories about cattle mutilations, alien abductions, and UFO sightings that were happening in the area. Gabe Valdez and Paul Benowitz struck up a friendship. Valdez was basically the go-to cop for any strange phenomenon in the area, and Paul was compiling more and more data that aliens were real, were here, and were very interested in Kirtland Air Force Base. In 1980, Valdez caught the Myrna Hansen case and asked Paul Benowitz for help. Myrna Hansen claimed to have had a terrifying experience. When she was driving to her home in Eagles Nest, New Mexico, both she and her son saw 2 UFOs over a field. They left the car running and got out to take a closer look. They saw a cow grazing in the field get lifted into one of the UFOs by a beam of light. The next thing she knew, Myrna and her son were back in the car, the engine off, and hours had passed. But what happened during those hours, she had trouble remembering. And what she did remember, she had trouble discussing. So Gabe and Paul brought in a psychology professor to place Myrna under hypnosis to see if she could access these suppressed memories. The hypnosis session began, and based on what Myrna Hansen remembered, she had every reason to be terrified. Myrna Hansen remembered that as she was driving and saw very bright lights in the sky, she and her son got out of the car to see what they were. The lights were coming from a floating craft and were affecting a herd of cattle. One cow seemed to be struggling and panicking as it was levitated up into one of the objects. Then she remembered that she was abducted and given a thorough and very violating physical examination. And though her abductors never spoke, she recalls hearing them in her mind. They said she was taken by accident, but now that she was here, they had no choice but to continue with the procedure. She described their appearance as what we now call a gray alien. She also reported being taken to an underground base, and there she saw body parts floating in vats of bubbling liquid, and she remembered a terrible smell. The alien abduction stories are unfortunately fairly common now, but in 1980, this was very unusual. Then Myrna remembered something really disturbing, something that could be confirmed. She said a device was surgically implanted into her body, and she believed this was so the aliens could track her and control her mind. Now, this could be checked. Myrna was taken to the nearby Lovelace Medical Center and x-rayed. At the base of her skull, right where she said it would be, was the implant. Myrna also had a very faint scar on the back of her neck. Now, to be fair, the doctors thought it was a natural growth, though they didn't know what kind. The doctors might not have been convinced, but Myrna Hansen, Gabe Valdez, and Paul Benowitz were. There was an alien presence focused on the Kirtland Air Force Base and on the town of Dulce not far away. Now remember, Paul Benowitz was reporting everything he saw to the Air Force. Richard Doty, an agent working for the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, or OSI, was assigned to Paul's case. And Doty and Paul spent so much time together that they became personal friends. Paul showed Richard Doty sketches that Myrna Hansen made of what she saw while she was abducted. She drew hallways, elevators, rooms, and laboratories. Then Doty confirmed that her drawings matched the Manzano Weapons Storage Complex, which was an underground facility. And over the next 20 years, more and more information would emerge that confirmed not only are aliens on Earth, but they're also working with the United States government. But when did this partnership begin? And why would the government be working with aliens, and for what goal? Well, in 1995, we would get our answer when Phil Schneider, an engineer who helped build Dulce Base, blew the whistle. And it's darker than you could possibly imagine. In 2021, the Pentagon budget was $750 billion. And since 1996, the American military has received $8.5 trillion in taxpayer dollars and never has had to account for any of it. In 2016, an investigation discovered that the Pentagon was covering up $125 billion in so-called wasted dollars. Now, if the military budget comes up short in a given year, whatever number that is just written in. It's called a plug, and then boom, balanced budget.
You try that with your taxes and see how that works out for you.
Well, they throw you in jail. But there's evidence that the money is not being wasted. It's actually part of the Pentagon's black budget. In 1995, at the Preparedness Expo, Phil Schneider blew the whistle on one of the most secret black budget programs in history.
On the southwest part of the Archuleta Mesa, we built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles, hollowed out underground. We were in the process of the early stages of building. We drilled 4 large tunnel-like holes. Some of them ran 2.5 miles under the surface. The equipment kept coming up broken. So we wanted to go down and wanted to send somebody down there, a human observer, or human observers in this case, to find out what was going on.
In 1979, Schneider was working for Morrison Knudsen on a geology team, digging exploratory shafts for a new underground base in Dulce. And though working with heavy-duty equipment, the drills kept breaking. Once a drill punched through, Phil described black, sooty air billowing up through the opening, and the air smelled like rotten garbage. Phil put on a protective suit and headed down the lift to investigate. And on the way, walking through camp, he noticed there were an awful lot of armed troops.
When I saw Green Beret and Black Beret people encamped inside of our geologist camp, I knew something was up.
When Phil reached the bottom, he was face to face with a 7-foot-tall gray alien. He said its stench was worse than anything he'd ever smelled before. Then another alien appeared. Phil panicked, grabbed his pistol, and started firing. And he managed to kill one of the aliens, but the others started firing back. Phil was hit with what he called a plasma weapon and lost 2 fingers and part of his left hand. And this plasma weapon also gave him cancer.
Never bring a gun to a plasma fight.
That's good advice. Now, Phil thought he was dead when suddenly a Green Beret who had followed him down grabbed him and put him on the lift. Now, Phil made it, but nobody else did. 66 men lost their lives in what was called the Battle of Dulce Base. The American military had accidentally drilled into an alien base that had been there for 400 or 500 years. So now the military had a choice to make: go to war with the aliens or cooperate with them. Now, winning a war against entities with such advanced technology wasn't possible, so a deal was struck. Aliens would give advanced technology to humans.
Now, what did the humans have to give to the aliens?
Well, humans would have to give the aliens other humans.
Our United States government lied, did not tell us anything about the alien threat. There's a war underneath there, and I'm talking dead serious.
Phil Schneider was an outspoken advocate for government transparency about the alien presence on Earth. He became well known on the UFO lecture circuit, giving talks about his time working on top secret government projects. He's most known for his talk at the 1995 Preparedness Expo, where he revealed all kinds of information. As of 1995, there were 131 active secret underground bases in the United States and 1,477 around the world. All the bases in the United States are connected by magnetic levitation trains that can reach speeds of Mach 2. Phil said that there are 7 benevolent alien species currently living on Earth, and 4 evil species. He said that the US government signed 4 treaties with the aliens in 1944, in 1954, 1962, and the last one in 1979 after the Dulce battle. The treaty signed in 1954, called the Greada Treaty, was signed between the US government and a species of gray aliens. And the treaty says aliens would be allowed to abduct and experiment on humans as long as the US government, specifically the committee known as Majestic 12, was informed and provided a list of abductees.
The government sure does like making lists of people, huh?
It sure does.
Why are there so many abductions? Don't aliens know how boring humans are?
Well, according to Phil Schneider, at least 9 races of aliens view humans as a food source.
It's a cookbook.
It's a cookbook! No! 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 Ah! No!
Classic Twilight Zone episode. But the aliens don't consume human flesh. Instead, they use the secretions of glands from mammals. This species of alien suffers from a genetic disorder, and the enzymes in mammal hormones keep the aliens healthy. And some alien races use human adrenaline as a recreational intoxicant.
Ugh, they get high from human secretions?
They do.
Yeah, that's a hard pass for me.
Me too. Now, in exchange for access to humans for experimentation, the aliens would provide the United States with advanced technology. According to Phil Schneider, military technology is 1,200 years ahead of what civilians have now. Stealth technology came from aliens. The US government now has the ability to create special metal alloys, but they can only be created in the vacuum of space. The US military has a device that causes earthquakes. The 1989 San Francisco earthquake and the 1995 Kobe earthquake were weapons tests.
Seiko to score, and he fails to get Dave Parker at second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earth.
And Phil Schneider makes all kinds of other claims. He said the bombings of the World Trade Center in 1993 and the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995 were done with miniature nuclear devices provided by the aliens. He said AIDS and other viruses were created as a means of controlling the population.
All right, hold on. I gotta stop you there.
What?
You expect me to believe that a government would artificially create a dangerous virus in a lab? My friend, that is a bridge too far.
Sarcasm?
Yes, of course it's sarcasm.
Phil Schneider believed that all this was happening for one purpose: to establish a new world order. The alien plan is to completely take over the planet and eliminate almost 90% of the world's population.
Ooh, this is the kind of talk that makes the men in black come a-knocking.
That's true. And Phil Schneider said he was under constant surveillance by the government. He even claimed he was attacked by an FBI agent and killed the agent in self-defense. And he reported this to the FBI, but nothing came of it.
No, because the government would have to admit to all this stuff.
That's right. Phil was constantly in fear for his life. He said he had 11 close friends all die under mysterious circumstances, but every death was ruled a suicide. In fact, Phil Schneider told his friends and family over and over, if I ever end up dead, I didn't kill myself. It was murder. He was adamant about this.
Yeah, I can't help notice that you keep speaking about this guy in the past tense.
Well, in January 1996, just 4 months after he gave his famous lecture, Phil Schneider was found dead in his apartment.
No, come on.
Apparently, he had taken his own life.
Oh, come on.
There's a good chance that when I fly back to to Vegas, I have to drive home. I left my car down in Vegas. I have to drive home alone. I'm scared to hell.
Phil Schneider was constantly worried. He told his family that if he was ever found dead, to not believe the story, that it was murder. A few weeks after that, Phil Schneider was found dead in his apartment. At first, his death was ruled unknown, even though he had a medical tube wrapped around his neck. And a lot of details about his death don't add up. First, there was no note. Also, he had enough pills on hand to die painlessly. He also had a gun. The medical tube was wrapped around his throat 3 times and then tied in a knot under his chin. Now, strangling yourself this way seems difficult, especially in Phil's case. He was missing half of his left hand. His shoulders had limited motion. He had brittle bone syndrome from cancer and spent a lot of time in a wheelchair. He was a weak and frail man. The medical examiner, for some reason, refused to visit the scene, though he was legally required to. He did take blood and urine samples, but refused to test them because he said it was a waste of time. And when Phil's family inquired about those samples, they were told they were sent to an independent lab and were now missing. When Phil's ex-wife Cynthia went to collect his belongings, everything was gone. Recordings of Phil's lectures, photographs, research, even physical evidence from Dulce Base. It was all missing. And then something very strange happened. An obituary appeared in the local paper saying Phil died of a stroke. Phil's family didn't write that obituary. So who did?
Any senator, House of Representative, person, President of the United States, Vice President, any cabinet member lying to the American public is a traitor and should be dealt with in an appropriate fashion.
Phil Schneider wasn't the only person who claimed to know about Dulce Base. Thomas Castello was a military photographer with top-secret clearance, and he specialized in photographing sensitive projects. Castello worked at an underground facility near Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, most likely Area 51. He also worked at Dulce Base. In 1987, Castello turned whistleblower, and before he left Dulce Base, he stole a set of documents that were eventually called the Dulce Papers. He also stole 30 black and white photos as well as videotape.
There are several things you should know about. I took an oath under penalty of death that no matter what I saw or heard, I would never divulge the information. At the Dulce Base, treason is anything that mentions the details of daily operations at this facility when outside the confinement of this base. When I first arrived, the story they told us was that this is a tri-biotransfer facility with advanced technology doing advanced, adventurous methodology for medical and mental gains, which is a fancy way of saying they do really risky things with human life just to see what would happen.
This is the most famous Castello photograph, humans in pods.
What the hell's going on here?
Well, you know how aliens harvest human hormones for various purposes?
Yeah, I'm trying to forget it, but yeah.
Well, these are cloning vats. Much easier to use humans as a food source when you could just grow them in a tube. And Castello was the first person to show us the different floors of Dulce Base and what they were used for. Level 1 is security and communications. Level 2 is human staff and housing.
Wait a minute. If there's a floor labeled human staff, then that means...
There is housing for non-human staff.
No!
Level 3 is executive offices and labs. Level 4 is mind control experiments. Level 5 is alien housing. Level 6 is genetic experiments and the zoo.
What, the zoo?
Oh yeah. When genetic splicing between humans and aliens was successful, they would often put the hybrid creature on display.
Oh boy.
And level 7 is cryogenics and cold storage. Yeah?
This story, this is a lot.
Oh, have you had too much?
Oh, wait, there's more?
Oh, much more.
The alien agenda is the complete takeover of this planet, the killing off of 5, 6 to 7/8 of the world's population by the year 2029. The U.S. military has known about this for 45 years. They've told no one.
Most of the information we get from Costello comes from a single interview he gave called the Branton interview, and I'll link the full text below. Apparently there were, or are, over 180,000 aliens working in the facility. Costello gives us details about how the base is administered, and there are many different races that work there, and they're divided into ruling castes and worker castes.
Well, obviously humans are workers.
Obviously. But there are also alien worker castes, and ultimately all races report to a single ruling class called the Draco.
That sounds like...
Lizard people.
Lizard people! Yes! Hey, speaking of lizard people, now is a great time to pick up a Hecklefish Lizard People mug. It makes a great gift.
What are you doing?
What? Someone's got to do the plugs? Go to shop.thewifiles.com and grab your Lizard People mug today.
Anyway, the Draco...
Lizard people.
The lizard people are not alien. They evolved from reptiles and dinosaurs and have remained hidden. They created the underground tunnel system hundreds or thousands of years ago. And in the 1960s, they were made to be more suitable to humans and other races that the Draco created.
Created?
Oh yeah. The Draco created races for labor.
The worker caste does the daily chores, mopping the latex floors, cleaning the cages, bringing food to the hungry people and other species. It is their job to formulate the proper mixture for the Type 1 and Type 2 beings that the Draco race has created. The working caste work at the labs as well as at the computer banks. Basically speaking, the reptilian races are active at all levels of the Dulce base. There are several different races of aliens that work on the east section of Level 6.
Thomas Costello lived the rest of his life in hiding in Europe. He's since passed away, but if you're interested in hearing more from him, I'll post a link to a message board where he answers a lot more questions. And I just scratched the surface here. His interview is the rabbitest of rabbit holes.
Rabbitest?
Shut up.
Oy vey.
John Lear might have had a more interesting life than his father, William Lear, who invented the Lear jet. John Lear was a pilot who broke 17 world records in many types of aircraft. He flew cargo planes for the CIA in the 60s and 70s. John Lear was also one of the most visible proponents of the theory that not only are aliens here on Earth, but they're also colluding with the United States government. Lear became interested in UFOs in 1986 after talking with U.S. Air Force personnel who witnessed the UFO landing at Bentwaters Air Force Base near London. In that encounter, 3 small aliens walked right up to Wing Commander General Gordon Williams, and that became known as the Rendlesham Forest Incident. In 1988, Lear released a document titled UFO Cover-Up that exposed all kinds of secret government and alien activity. It's essentially a manifesto, and I'll link to the original text below. Lear covers the death of James Forrestal, Majestic 12, Roswell, abductions, cattle mutilations, and, of course, Dulce Base. Lear said that he gathered 4 independent confirmations that the 7-story Dulce Base complex was real. He even detailed the different species of aliens who live and work there.
The problem is not only just the fact that there are 5 and as many as 10 different civilizations visiting us. Apparently, and this is from the research that I've done, at least 90% of them are hostile. And when I say hostile, if not hostile, they have a completely different set of morals than we do.
John Lear believed that, based on evidence, aliens are trying to regenerate their own race at our expense. He said they suffered a nuclear holocaust or severe illness that caused their entire race to weaken. This is why, according to John Lear, aliens are attempting to crossbreed with humans. In fact, he said this was successfully done 7 times over several years. Lear discusses the book Intruders by Bud Hopkins. Hopkins spent years studying abduction cases and was one of the first to reveal that human females were being used to gestate alien or alien-human hybrid children. This was information Hopkins learned through interviewing and hypnotizing hundreds of abductees. Now, obviously, John Lear didn't subscribe to the theory that aliens are here to protect us from nuclear war or help us in any way. Aliens are here to use us as livestock, as breeding chambers, and as subjects of horrible experiments. And what's even more frightening is the United States government is complicit in all of this. John Lear ended his document by saying, "The best advice I can give you is, next time you see a flying saucer and are awed by its obvious display of technology, run like hell."
In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the commanding general of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real.
And it started out with a crash at Roswell.
1947 is what the public has been told. Something crashed in the backyard in New Mexico, a place called Roswell, New Mexico. Unfortunately, that's what the public's been told. The military's known about the alien question for the better part of 70 years.
And a second crash site that occurred in Magdalena or Horse Mesa out west of Magdalena, New Mexico.
And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly.
And I know that they were reverse engineering. I was never actually briefed on it, but, you know, common sense can tell me that this craft over here isn't something we made. It was reverse engineered.
Reverse engineered,
yeah.
Yes.
They trained 9 months before they ever flew it. And then they trained another, I can't remember how long, 4 or 5 months, flying it all around Nevada. And it worked fine.
I'm not attacking the United States Air Force. I'm attacking a small group in there that has been persistently keeping this from the public, just as they've kept other things.
The Air Force has made an art form of ridiculing people who have talked about this thing. They've done an excellent job of covering it up for the last 40 years.
We've been lied to, and the lies have got to stop, and they must stop immediately.
Well, that was a roller coaster of a story, and not much of a happy ending. But what's true? Obviously, there's no hard evidence that Dulce Base exists, but there's also no evidence that it doesn't. And since all we have are eyewitness accounts, let's look at the witnesses. First, Phil Schneider. This isn't a Bob Lazar situation where all the evidence is mysteriously erased. There are plenty of records that show Phil did indeed work as a government contractor on many different projects, but his story has some holes, like his misunderstanding of military and law enforcement protocols, procedures, and jurisdictions. He said during the Battle of Dulce, there were 66 soldiers from the US and NATO, Green Berets, Black Berets, Delta Force, and Secret Service. The special forces he names are American, not NATO. NATO doesn't operate on American soil and never has. And even if it did, there's no way the US government would allow foreign military to be present for this kind of operation. He said Delta Force was there. In 1979, Delta Force was barely 18 months old. Very few people even knew about it. The military denied its existence for years, and even now, everything about Delta is classified. We don't know the size of the unit, their budget, or their missions, but we do know that Delta Force was created as a counterterrorism unit. I wouldn't expect them to be on a domestic operation that was essentially providing facility security. I could be wrong. Now, in 1979, Black Berets were only worn by Army Rangers. Now, could they have been deployed for security? Sure, but I doubt it. Now, Phil says the Secret Service was there. They weren't. The Secret Service is a law enforcement agency that investigates crimes. Yes, they provide personal protection to high-ranking political officials, but that's a small part of what they do. Phil said he lost his hand in the battle with aliens. Maybe, but his roommate from college said he lost it when he was a young man working as an electrical lineman putting up power lines. Now, Phil Schneider said his father, Oscar Schneider, was a Nazi U-boat captain who was captured and then fought for the Americans in World War II. Phil's father was actually born in San Francisco in 1906. Phil's grandparents were born here too, in Portland. We have documentation that Oscar Schneider was in the United States until 1930, and then he was in the U.S. Navy Medical Corps from 1931 to 1946, and retired with the rank of captain. He never commanded submarines for Hitler or for the United States. He was a medical doctor who specialized in shipboard safety techniques. Now, Phil shows this picture in his lectures.
I have a picture of one of the aliens been working for the United States Pentagon for the last 58 years. His name is Val Valiant Thor. He's right here.
If you remember our video on Valiant Thor, you know that Val was most likely a fictional character created by Frank Stranges for his book Stranger at the Pentagon, which was a ripoff of The Day the Earth Stood Still. The photo Phil uses is supposedly his father in the ready room of the USS Eldridge because his father was part of the Philadelphia experiment. Because of course he was. But there's no room that large on a Cannon-class destroyer. Also, the Philadelphia experiment happened in the 40s. The lights in this picture wouldn't be used until the 1960s. And there are lots more holes in the story. And Phil Schneider had a documented history of mental illness. Now, his story sounds like paranoid delusions. He says 28% of the US GDP is used for black ops. 28% is very specific. Why not 25 or 30? How does he even know that number? The people who work in black ops don't know the Pentagon's budget. Nobody does, but somehow Phil knows? People with delusions often create rich worlds full of specific details. Now, Phil Schneider very well could have been telling the truth. I just don't think so. I think he suffered a psychotic break in dealing with his cancer diagnosis and latched onto the Dulce Bay story as a way to take control of his life and as a way to attain some notoriety. That all said, his death was weird. If you trace back the history of the Dulce Bay story, you'll always end up with a person named James Bishop, whose real name was allegedly Tal Levesque. Now, the book Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius, written by Adam Gorightly, identifies Levesque as the chief architect of the Dulce Bay story. In the 70s, Levesque published a newsletter called Hollow Earth Hassle, which was about creatures living inside the Earth. And those stories were based on a story called The Shaver Mystery, which appeared in science fiction pulp magazines in 1947. And the story took off after Paul Bennewitz claimed he discovered alien transmissions coming from Dulce Base. A woman named Ann West created the Tom Costello character, probably based somewhat on what Paul Bennewitz said. Now, she claimed that a lot of her information was coming from someone named Tom Costello, but all the information was coming from Levesque. And you won't be surprised to hear that no record of anyone named Thomas Costello was found in the US military during the time he was supposed to be there. According to Levesque, various researchers would latch on to the Dulce Bay story and then add their own flair, each person building on the story of the people who came before them. And by the way, that super creepy photo of the humans in alien pods, Thomas Costello didn't take that picture. It's actually a screenshot of the film The Sixth Day, released in 2000. Now, why would Levesque do this? Well, he passed away in 2018, but he said it was his job, whatever that means. We know for a fact that Agent Richard Doty of the Air Force OSI perpetrated a misinformation campaign against Paul Bennewitz. And this campaign included confirming Paul's suspicion about the underground base and confirming the drawings by abductee Myrna Hansen. Now, was Levesque part of this government operation? We don't know. John Lear also circulated this story. And at one UFO convention, Lear met with other UFO researchers who were going to release a public statement about what they knew to be true. Apparently, Lear's claims were so outlandish, the other researchers wouldn't sign on to it. Lear stormed out of the convention.
You have to get pretty wild when people at a UFO convention don't believe you.
You sure do. Bill Moore, a UFO researcher who worked with Richard Doty and the government on the misinformation campaign, he said Lear was an intelligence agent. And remember, Lear did have a long history of working with the CIA. Now, this is the problem with these stories. UFOs, underground bases, alien experiments. As long as the research is considered fringe, most of the people working in the field are going to be fringe. They don't give out Nobel Prizes for UFO research.
They should.
They should, and maybe one day they will, but until then, UFO researchers will be criticized and ostracized by mainstream scientists. Now, me and you want to believe, but there's nobody to trust. We know for a fact that Richard Doty ran a misinformation campaign against Bennewitz and the entire UFO community, feeding them wild stories about aliens and underground bases. But later, Doty said the stories were mostly true. So now we're left in this position where we don't know who or what to believe. We do know that the US government wants it this way. Now, I believe there are secret bases all over the United States. Is there one in Dulce? I don't know. There are lots of UFO stories that I want to be true, but this isn't one of them. Abductions, genetic experiments, organ harvesting, and a new world order? We better hope Phil Schneider, John Lear, Myrna Hansen, and all these other witnesses are wrong. Because if they're not, we're in big trouble. Yeah, that one ended kind of dark. I try not to do that super often. When there's a dark episode, I try to have a more uplifting ending, but sometimes the message is just what it is. I told the truth. But the next episode is a little bit more fun. It is video 87. Oh, about Planet Serpo. Super fun story. It's about a 10-year exchange program between the United States Air Force and the aliens on Planet Serpo. And it's a wild story. I take you from the beginning of sort of the negotiations through the travel to the planet, what it's like on the planet, and then the return trip home and all of that stuff. So that's in there. So it's a pretty wild story. Believe it or not, that's up to you. Richard Doty says it's true, but, you know, we all have our own opinions about Doty and disinformation. But either way, this episode contains one of my favorite UFO videos of all time. It's the landing at Holloman Air Force Base. It's super compelling because you really can see this ship like hovering down and landing on the Air Force Base. It's wild. As to whether the exchange program is real or not, Doty says yes. I don't know, but you be the judge.
3 +1 5 +00.
What if you were offered the opportunity to visit another planet? You'd get to experience the culture of an alien race, explore a new world, see and use technology that's 5,000 years ahead of ours. Would you do it? Well, before you answer, there are a few catches. You'll be gone at least 10 years, and when you return to Earth, all evidence of your existence will be erased. You have to start a new life with a new identity, forbidden to tell anyone about what you experienced. Now would you do it? Well, in 1965, 12 astronauts were sent to an alien planet as part of a human-alien exchange program. 13 years later, they returned home. Well, most of them did. The mission commander wrote a 3,000-page report of everything the team experienced. First alien contact, the 40 light-year trip to the alien world, and everything that happened on the planet. This is the true story of Project Serpo. When Colonel McKeever of the United States Air Force arrived at Fort Leavenworth, he was excited, but he didn't have much information. All he knew is that he was selected from hundreds of candidates to command the most important space mission in the history of the human race. That's quite a description. Naturally, he asked for details about the mission, but was told he would be briefed during training. McKeever did know the mission was going to be long, 10 years, plus almost a year for training and another year in quarantine at the end of the mission. So 12 years away from home. It was 1965, so he wouldn't be back until the late 70s. Now, for most people, this would be difficult, but McKeever had no relatives, no wife, no kids, and very few friends. His life was the Air Force. As far as he was concerned, he could leave for 12 years or 20. It was all the same to him. And that was a good thing because another condition of the mission is that he was to be sheep-dipped.
Sheep-dipped?
Well, sheep-dipped is an intelligence term used to describe identities that are made to disappear. All records, military, civilian, school records, Social Security, DMV, IRS, it's like you never existed.
No, I wouldn't mind disappearing from the IRS.
I understand that.
Taxes are theft!
Colonel McKeever parked his car and was met by a young military police officer. After exchanging salutes, they walked in silence to an office building at the edge of the base. The outside of the building was nondescript, painted that gray, green, beige color that the military used for everything. The inside of the building was very different, though. As a colonel, McKeever had been in plenty of secure buildings, but nothing like this. Metal detectors, cameras everywhere, armed guards posted in every hallway. McKeever's escort motioned to an elevator. McKeever asked, "You're not coming with me?" The young man said no, he didn't have clearance. He saluted and the elevator doors closed. McKeever felt the elevator taking him several stories down. He noticed there were no buttons in the elevator, no indication of the number of floors. The elevator doors opened and another young man was waiting. McKeever noticed his badge said Air Force Office of Special Investigations. As far as Colonel McKeever knew, OSI was a law enforcement agency. He had no idea what they would be doing here, but he knew not to ask. McKeever entered the briefing room, which looked like a classroom. There were 11 people seated. He saw 2 Army uniforms, 2 Navy, and the rest were Air Force. At the front of the room was another Air Force colonel that McKeever didn't recognize, who told him to take a seat. The other colonel said to the group, "What I'm about to show you is classified beyond top secret. There are fewer than 60 people in the world who know this information. If you repeat what you learn here today, you'll be charged with treason. Understood?" The group nodded slowly, clearly aware of the weight of the situation. The colonel pulled down a screen and called to someone to get the lights. On the screen, a black and white film began to play. The first few seconds were the typical warnings about unauthorized viewing and other disclaimers that Colonel McKeever had seen 1,000 times. The footage showed what appeared to be the desert at night, though it was hard to tell. The footage seemed to be 20 years old. Then a title came on the screen that McKeever didn't expect. It read, "Roswell, New Mexico, 1947, First Contact." The film lasted about an hour and left everyone in the room stunned. They had heard of Roswell and the supposed UFO crash. The Air Force said it was a weather balloon, and that explanation was good enough for McKeever. The film explained that the UFO crash in Roswell did happen, though technically the crash was in Corona, New Mexico. And 2 years later, in 1949, another UFO crashed nearby. Now, this was something McKeever didn't know, and there was footage of the Roswell recovery. At first, it was difficult to understand what he was looking at. It was clearly metal wreckage, but it could have been a plane for all McKeever knew. Then he saw it. Hiding behind a rock was an alien. It looked like aliens look in science fiction movies. Short, pale skin, large head with huge black eyes, small nose and mouth. The military called this creature Extraterrestrial Biological Entity 1, or EBA-1. EBA-1 was the lone survivor of the crash. 5 other alien bodies were taken away. There was also footage of the 1949 crash. It was a similar craft, silver, saucer-shaped, and there were 6 bodies there and no survivors. EBA-1 was taken to the Air Force facility at Los Alamos, and according to the briefing, he stayed there until his death in 1952. The Air Force learned a great deal from EBA-1 in those 5 years. At first, communication was difficult. EBA-1's language was comprised of tones, not words, but through hand gestures and repetition, EBA-1 was able to communicate. He said that his race, which the military called the Ebens, had been visiting Earth for 2,000 years. On this trip, something caused his ship to crash. EBA-1 suspected it was radar, which was a technology his people didn't have. Some equipment was salvaged from EBA-1's craft, specifically a communication device. EBA-1 offered to share this technology if the military would allow him to repair it so he could contact his people. Of course, the military agreed. EBA-1 was able to get the communicator working again and sent several messages but never received a reply. And this could have been due to a number of reasons. EBA-1's home planet, which the military called Serpo, was in the Zeta Reticuli system, almost 40 light years from Earth. The Ebens used wormhole technology to travel and send messages back and forth. After EBA-1 died in 1952, the Air Force tried but was unable to reverse engineer other alien technology. But they did have a working communicator, so the Air Force continued to send messages for years. The persistence paid off. Eventually, they received a reply, and two-way communication between Earth and Serpo continued for a long time. The Ebens even learned to speak broken English. After learning about the crashes, the Ebens wanted their crew's bodies back, but the military, being the military, wanted something in exchange.
Oh, let me guess. They wanted technology.
Yep. But the Ebens said it would be too dangerous to give humans their technology.
I could have told them that.
So the Ebens suggested a compromise. The military would return the bodies of the alien crew. In exchange, an Eben would come to Earth and assist the U.S. Army. And 12 humans could spend 10 years on planet Serpo. This became known as Project Serpo, though its actual name is Project Crystal Knight. And so began the first intergalactic exchange program in history. The training was intense and long, a year. Colonel McKeever thought Special Forces had a difficult training program, but it was nothing like this. There were the usual physical exercises and classroom training. They trained in survival, escape and evasion techniques, weapons, explosives, and intelligence gathering. They also learned about Eben history and Eben biology. But there was aggressive and invasive psychological training and testing. McKeever remembered one unusually difficult exercise designed to test the team's ability to cope with isolation and confined spaces. Team members were buried 7 feet underground, one at a time, in a 7 by 5 foot box for 5 days. No lights, no way to communicate, only a small air hole and food and water. Everybody passed this test, but some people really struggled with it.
Oh, come on. 5 by 7 feet is a palace. Grow a pair.
During training, McKeever got to know his team. There were scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. They all received general training and training geared toward their specialty. For example, the pilots were taught how to fly an EBN aircraft. This was surprisingly easy and apparently a lot of fun. The EBNs returned to Earth in 1964 to retrieve the bodies. This happened at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. And there's actually footage of that landing.
Roger, launch official standby. With current checklist will run down. And then for you, 3 all right, we're situated here right before liftoff. Checklist 87 beta liner. Roger, launch vehicle. Systems checklist proceeding as follows. Ceiling 300 alpha.
About a year later, in July 1965, the team traveled to Groom Lake, near Area 51, for the landing. At 6 a.m., the EBN ship landed. Several EBNs came out to meet the team of 12 and about 16 military officials. The human team was allowed to bring whatever they needed for the stay. They brought 40 tons of gear, including 10 motorcycles and 3 Jeeps. Everything was easily loaded using anti-gravity technology. Now, lucky for us, McKeever was ordered to keep a diary.
Okay, we loaded everything and it fits, but we have to transfer all of it to the bigger ship once we get to the rendezvous point. Really excited about this. No reservations by anyone. The training commander asked all members to make a final decision. The team all said go. We go. Interior of EBA craft is big. There are 3 levels. This is different than the one we trained on. I think that was a scout craft. This one is a shuttlecraft.
The shuttle flew into a large ship. McKeever wrote that the shuttle bay ceiling was about 100 feet high. It would take almost 10 months to get to Serpo. The human team was escorted to the area where they would be spending the next 270 days. Each team member was assigned a small pod, each with a single chair, no seatbelts or harnesses. McKeever was surprised that gravity was consistent. He was expecting to be weightless. Then he saw a light panel change from white to red. He assumed this meant they were moving. His eyes became blurry, the room started to spin, and then he blacked out. The journey was difficult. The human team spent a large part of 10 months sick. They would often become dizzy and sometimes physically ill. During one part of the journey, an EBN gave the humans a cloudy liquid that tasted like chalk, and a cookie or a biscuit that had no taste at all. But when they ate it, they felt better almost instantly. After a while, the human team was allowed to move around the ship.
We were able to walk around the ship, but it's so large, it's difficult to understand how such a large ship can move so fast. 633 wants to see the engines. Our guide takes 4 of us to the engine room, or whatever they wish to call the room. It contains large, very large metal containers. They are in a circle, with the ends of each pointing into the center. Many pipes or some type of large tubes connects them. In the center of these containers is a copper-colored coil, or something looking like a coil. There's a bright light being shined from a point above into the center of the coil. We hear a very dull hum, but no major loud sounds. 661 thinks it is a negative matter versus positive matter system.
One day, toward the end of the journey, McKeever got out of his pod and asked the assistant commander, team member 203, to round up the team.
203?
Yep. Team members were now required to refer to each other by their number and not their name.
Oh, because they were dipped in the sheep thing?
Sheep dipped. So 203 rounds up the team, but there's a problem. One of the pilots, team member 308, is missing. McKeever asks what happened to 308. One of the EBNs says, "Earthman not alive."
Uh-oh.
McKeever asks to see him, but the EBNs say that's not possible. The security officer, team member 899, says, "I'm going to get the guns." Part of the gear the human team brought included weapons. They were each issued a rifle, they had handguns, they also had grenades and C4 explosives. 899 begins to storm off when a female EBN who speaks very good English says, "Please, no guns." She explains that 308's body is in quarantine until they can figure out what happened. The EBNs allow the human doctors, 700 and 754, to examine the body. They determine 308 died from an embolism, but the EBNs want him to remain quarantined. McKeever agrees as long as 308 can be given a proper burial on Serpo. Not long after that, the humans are instructed to return to their pods and prepare for landing, which they do. There must be something about jumping in and out of a wormhole that's hard on human anatomy, because McKeever blacks out again.
Boy, this guy really can't hold his wormhole.
6 hours later, his pod opens and his team walks to the door. Slowly, the door opens. The door opens and bright light washes into the craft. The team members were issued heavy-duty sunglasses, like those worn during nuclear bomb tests. They quickly put them on. The first thing McKeever noticed was the heat. He asked one of the scientists, team member 633, to check the temperature. 107 degrees Fahrenheit. The landscape is barren. There are hills in the distance, but no vegetation, just soil and rock and blue sky above. McKeever thinks it looks like Arizona or New Mexico. One major difference, 2 suns in the sky. McKeever's report supposedly has several thousand photographs and even film. Unfortunately, these haven't been leaked, except for one photo, the 2 suns of Serpo. Serpo is in the Zeta Reticuli binary star system. Because of its 2 suns, Serpo is never in complete darkness. According to the report, Serpo has one main sun that the planet orbits, the second sun is farther away. A large number of Ebens have gathered for the arrival. They're all a little over 4 feet tall, and the human team can't really tell them apart unless they're wearing different clothing. A female Eben, who they designate EBA-2, introduces herself as translator and guide. The human team is escorted through an Eben village to where they'll be staying. And for a technologically advanced species, the way the Ebens live appears somewhat primitive. There are only about 650,000 Ebens on the planet who live in small communities. At the center of each community is a large tower about 300 feet high. On top of the tower is what looks like a mirror. The humans learn that this tower is how Ebens tell time. This was a difficult adjustment because the Eben day is 40 hours long, not 24. And with there never being darkness, it was hard to adapt their schedules. Eben families were similar to Earth's, typically a female and a male with 2 children. Families were only allowed to have 2 children, and children were rarely seen. They mature very quickly and are isolated while they're young. The Eben homes were small domes that reminded the team of adobe houses in the Southwest. The humans finally arrive at their accommodations.
EBA-2 leads us to a series of huts, looking like adobe-style houses. There are 4. Behind them is an underground room or storage area. It is built into the ground, underground. We have to walk down a ramp. The doors look like military igloos that store our atomic bombs in Earth. All our gear taken off the spaceship is stored there. We walked down into this area. Very large room. Very cool. A lot cooler. We might have to sleep here. All our gear is there. 16 pallets of gear. This igloo is made up of something like concrete, but not the same texture. Feels like soft rubber, but still hard. The floor is made up of the same stuff. There are lights in the ceiling. Looks like spotlights. They have electricity.
Each home was equipped with an electrical device that looks like a small piece of plexiglass. No matter what's connected to it, the device outputs the correct amount of voltage. These devices could power a small handheld radio or an entire home without a problem. Supposedly, one of these devices was recovered from Roswell, but scientists haven't been able to reverse engineer this technology.
Allegedly.
Right. Now that they're finally on the planet, McKeever requests the body of team member 308 so they can give him a proper burial. EBA-1 takes McKeever to a building that looks like a medical facility. An Eben doctor meets them at the door. He speaks English almost perfectly. McKeever says he wants 308's body. The Eben doctor's confused. He says you can't have him. McKeever says, give us our man or we'll take him by force. EBA-2 jumps in. She says it's not that they don't want to return 308's body, it's that they can't. The doctor confirms this and says we're using him. McKeever asks what he means. The doctor casually says, well, we're cloning him and using him to create hybrids. Obviously, cloning a member of the team without permission was a problem. But McKeever heard the doctor out. On Eben, it was considered a great honor to donate your body to science for experimentation and cloning. McKeever doubted he could do much about the situation. The Ebens were peaceful, but they did have a military. If they wanted to put the humans in prison, or worse, McKeever knew there wasn't much he could do about it.
We were only 11 military personnel. We had no way of fighting the Ebens. We did not come 40 light years to start a war with the Ebens. A war we could not win. We could not even win a simple fist fight with the Ebens. Even if we could, what then?
So with the help of EBA-2, the doctor agrees that 308's body will not be used anymore. Not that it mattered much. The doctor said all of 308's blood, organs, tissue, and everything was used to create new creatures. McKeever said, show me. In a small anti-gravity aircraft, the human team was flown to a laboratory facility. The inside of the building was completely white. There were a lot of Ebens walking around, all wearing blue clothing. When they were brought to the first lab,
there were rolls of containers looking like glass bathtubs. Inside each bathtub were bodies. I was shocked, as were 700 and 754. Bodies. Strange-looking bodies. Not human bodies, at least not all of them. We started walking down the space between the tubs. We looked into the tubs. These were hideous-looking creatures. The first creature I see inside the tub looks like a porcupine. It appears to have a tube placed inside of it. The tube leads to a box underneath the tub. The next creature looks like nothing I can compare it to. It has blood-red skin, 2 spots in the middle, maybe eyes, no arms or legs. It had a very strange odor. The next creature was human-like, but the skin was white. Not skin white, the color white. The skin was wrinkled. The head was large with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a mouth. The neck was very small. The head looked almost as if it sat on the lower torso. The chest was thin, with large bone-like protrusions. The arms were curled with hands, but no thumbs. The legs were also curled with feet, but only 3 toes. I couldn't look at any more creatures.
Next, they went to what the doctor called a growing room. Here they used parts of different species, including parts of the dead human, to create new species.
EBA 2 said that parts of the blood and other organs are used to mix a substance that's placed inside the bodies. That was all EBA 2 could explain in English. They were breathing. They looked like humans, most of them. 2 of the beings on the end looked like humans with dog heads. These beings were not awake. They were either sleeping or drugged.
They finally arrived at a growing chamber that contained an entity that was created using parts of 308's body.
I was shocked. This being, with our teammates' blood and cells, looked like a large even, but the hands and legs were similar to humans. How could they have grown this being so quick? Obviously, this is well above our intelligence. I saw all I wanted to see. I told the doctor that we would like to leave. EBA 2 saw that I was upset and touched my hand. Instantly, I felt concern. We traveled outside this building, a building that I did not wish to see again. I saw the dark side of this civilization. The Ebens are not the humane civilization we thought they were.
Because of the misunderstanding of Eben time, the 10-year mission was actually 13 years. During that time, McKeever and his team learned a lot about Eben culture. Eben life was very regimented. As children mature, they're tested for aptitude and placed in jobs to which they're most suited. All Ebens work part of the day, they rest part of the day, and even pray part of the day, though the team never could figure out what kind of religion or spiritual beliefs they had. All manufacturing took place away from the Eben homes, same with agriculture. Ebens grew all their food hydroponically. The human team had taken about 2 years' worth of food with them, and when that ran out, they tried to get accustomed to Eben food, which wasn't easy. Everything tasted like paper or chalk.
Ooh, it sounds like they learned how to cook from my second wife. Her cooking was terrible.
How bad was it?
Her cooking was so bad, we prayed after the meal.
Good one.
No, I tell you, her cooking was bad.
How bad was it?
Her cooking was so bad, the flies chipped in for a screen door. Ooh, her cooking was bad.
How bad was it?
Her cooking was so bad, I left dental floss in the kitchen and all the roaches hung themselves. I got 1 million of them.
Ebens are vegetarian, but the humans wanted meat, and there were animals on the planet.
As I mentioned before, the Ebens allowed us to kill the beasts for meat. The meat isn't really bad. $8.99 says it tastes like bear, which I never ate. But Ebens look at us very strange when we eat meat. They allow us to do just about anything we want, and eating meat is something we need for the protein. We use the last of our salt and pepper, which does make eating their food more of a challenge. The Ebens don't have anything similar. They do have an herb, as we call it, something like oregano, which they use. It has a tart taste, but we have developed a taste for it.
The Ebens don't use money. All Ebens are required to work their assigned job and contribute to the community. There was a council of governors that controlled every single activity and every minute detail of the Ebens' lives. Food, clothing, furniture, everything is supplied. The Ebens go to a central distribution center and make a request, and we're given anything that they need.
You know, I noticed every time we do an alien story, they turn out to be hippie communists.
Well, maybe it's a better way of life.
Oh yeah, better for the people in charge.
The humans noticed they were getting a heavy dose of radiation from the 2 suns, and the heat was unbearable. It was consistently 120 to 130 degrees. Eventually, the humans were allowed to move further north. The climate was much more comfortable there, in the 60s and 70s, and it was actually green. This environment didn't suit the Ebens, but the humans loved it. After 13 years, The mission ended and 8 of the 12 team members returned. 308 died on the way, and a pilot died in a vehicle crash. 2 team members decided to stay on Serpo. When the remaining team members returned to Earth, they were quarantined and debriefed for an entire year. They were given new identities and large cash bonuses. 6 team members retired, and 2 returned to active duty. Most of the team developed illnesses due to the high dose of radiation they received on the planet and died pretty young. Colonel McKeever, the last surviving team member, retired to Florida. He passed away in 2002, but he leaves what is perhaps the most important legacy in human history, a 3,000-page report detailing every aspect of traveling to and living on an alien planet. Yet there are no monuments to him. No statues, no schools or streets bear his name. Colonel McKeever volunteered for this dangerous mission not for personal glory, but in service to all Americans and the entire human race. Maybe one day he'll be recognized as a great man, but sadly, that day is not today. The Project Serpo story has become legendary in the UFO community. It's firmly part of the lore. But is it real? To get to the truth of the Serpo story, there is a lot to unravel, and there are a couple of theories. The Project Serpo saga began in November 2005 when someone named Request Anonymous emailed Victor Martinez, who ran a UFO mailing list. Anonymous said he was a retired U.S. government employee who was involved in a special program. Over the next 9 months, he detailed the story you heard today. In the description, I'll link to a PDF of all his emails. It's 130 pages and covers every possible detail you can think of. The anonymous emails caused all kinds of drama. There was infighting, accusations, threats, and even a little bit of blackmail. The fighting all came down to, was Anonymous telling the truth? And if not, who was he and why was he doing this? After some excellent sleuthing from a couple of tech-savvy mailing list members, at least 5 separate email accounts, including Anonymous, were traced back to one man, the infamous Richard Doty.
Doty? This guy again?
Yep. If you've seen our episodes about Paul Benowitz and Dulce Base, you'll be familiar with the name. Doty was an Air Force intelligence agent who specialized in spreading UFO disinformation. He specifically targeted Paul Benowitz, an Albuquerque businessman who thought he was intercepting messages from aliens. Doty also used respected UFO researchers like Bill Moore to spread disinformation throughout the entire UFO community. 5 different accounts, including Doty's, were emailing from the same internet provider from the same neighborhood in New Mexico. Now, to be fair to Doty, he admits to being part of the disinformation campaign, but he also says that almost everything in the campaign was true. Roswell, abductions, underground bases, and even the Project Serpo intergalactic exchange program. He said everything happened. When confronted about the IP address issue, he got very angry and said that he could spoof any IP address he wanted to. Well, if that's true, why didn't he? Because, in my opinion, before Doty was exposed, Doty didn't realize email headers contained IP addresses, nor did he know that IPs could be spoofed. Eventually, the Serpo story exposed what was called the Team of 5. Christopher Green, Harold Putoff, Richard C. Doty, Victor Martinez, and Bill Ryan. Several of them worked for the CIA and military intelligence. All of them contributed to the Serpo lore in some way. But did they create the lore? Probably not. Even though Richard Doty and the Team of 5 propagated and added to the Serpo lore, a story about an alien exchange program has existed since the 1950s or 60s. In 2006, when Serpo was lighting up the UFO forums, a user named Chapman weighed in. He said he was formerly of the British Ministry of Defense and said he saw the Serpo files. Yes, the files were real, but the events described in them were not. Chapman said the original Serpo story was created by Alice Bradley Sheldon. She had a successful career as a science fiction writer under the pseudonym James Tiptree Jr. She published a lot of books over a lot of years and was inducted into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. She also happened to work for the CIA. During World War II, she worked for military intelligence and reached the rank of major, which was very high for women at the time. After the war, she joined the CIA. In the early 60s, the Soviets had successfully convinced the US government that they had nuclear weapons hidden on American soil. The nukes were supposedly in abandoned mines near large American cities and could be activated by sleeper agents. This wasn't true, but it wouldn't be completely disproved until 1980. Project Serpo was a response to this piece of intelligence. The CIA wanted to scare the Russians into thinking the United States had acquired advanced technology and was becoming friendly with aliens. and the Soviets might want to think twice about detonating a nuclear weapon. At first, the Serpo story worked. The KGB was nervous. But the story became more convoluted and started to sound like a cheesy sci-fi novel. This made the KGB suspicious. Then the CIA added photographs to the story. The Russians didn't buy it. The Serpo story had been forgotten for years, but resurfaced when Richard Doty and the Air Force perpetrated a very aggressive disinformation campaign against the UFO community. The purpose of this campaign was to flood the community with more and more outlandish stories. Eventually, UFO believers didn't know what was true and what wasn't. Some UFO researchers turned on each other. It was chaos and a highly successful intelligence operation. Then, over the years, Richard Doty goes from counterintelligence agent to UFO believer to keynote speaker at UFO conventions. A part of me wants to believe him, to give Doty the benefit of the doubt. He claims to this day to have nothing to do with Serpo. But if he's telling the truth, why is he making fake internet accounts? Why is he flooding the internet with the Serpo story? When anonymous aka Richard Doty began posting about Serpo, the story was simple. But then it got more and more elaborate. Anonymous was even answering questions from the group. What this did was flood the group with outlandish information. The members didn't know what to believe and they turned on each other. The same operation Doty ran in the 80s, and the same result. There is no physical evidence to prove that Serpo actually happened, but there's also no evidence to debunk it. We don't know for sure if it was made up by the CIA. Whether you believe it's true or you believe it's fake, it doesn't really matter. All we have are theories. We do know that Zeta Reticuli is a binary star system, but it's what's called a wide binary system. The stars are a light year apart, so there's no way that photo is correct. Also, it's highly unlikely that humans could eat food on an alien planet. In such a different biome, literally everything would be toxic. But Whitley Schreiber, Bob Lazar, and a few other whistleblowers say Serpo happened. Betty and Barney Hill are maybe the most famous UFO abductees of all time. And they said the aliens who abducted them were from Zeta Reticuli. Are all these people lying? Are they just building on a story that has evolved over the past 60 years? Or is there a planet out there somewhere, inhabited by an intelligent race of beings, living in peace, caring for one another, thinking back fondly on the time the strange Earth creatures came to visit? And if the Ebens are real, you can't help but wonder, what does that alien-human hybrid look like? I told you the story was wild. Next is our last video. It's about the Roswell crash. Now, this is a story I didn't want to cover because it's been covered a million times since 1947. But so many people asked for it, and I just gave in. It's like, you know, if there's 100 people asking for the same story, then let's get into it. And in researching it, I learned a lot of new information that's really not publicly known, not that well known. And I have made a promise to you that I think I've kept for the most part, is that if I cover an old story, I will keep digging and digging until I can find something that I'm pretty sure is new to you. And I think in this episode of Roswell, I keep that promise. But it's a long one. It's about 45 minutes, so put on some coffee and settle in. Sorry. What?
Hello, how can you ask them to put on coffee and not mention Hecklefish coffee mugs? This is such an
I told
obvious
you
one.
we're
I'm
not
just trying to
plugging
keep
merch.
this channel
I
going,
put you up there. I
merch
let
is
you
how we
be
make a
part of
living,
the
so
first segment.
sometimes
You
gotta
promised
suck
you
it
wouldn't
up,
plug
sell a
merch.
little.
And
5+00.
it was a sunny afternoon on June 24th, 1947, and Kenneth Arnold was flying his small aircraft over Mineral, Washington. He was heading to Yakima, but took a slight detour to look for a lost U.S. Marine Corps plane. If he could find it, he could collect a nice reward. Flying near Mount Rainier, he spotted a shiny object in his plane's mirror. Then he saw multiple flashes of light. It looked like a group of aircraft flying in formation, but something was wrong. These aircraft didn't have tails, and they were flying faster than anything he'd ever seen. After about 2 minutes, the objects vanished near Mount Adams. When Kenneth landed in Yakima, he immediately told his friends and airport staff about his bizarre experience. By the time he reached Pendleton, Oregon, his story had spread, and reporters were eager to hear it. In describing the odd movement of these objects, Kenneth said it was like a teacup saucer skipping across a lake. At that moment, the term flying saucer was born. And over the next 2 weeks, events would unfold that would affect every person on Earth. and change the course of history. When you drive east out of Albuquerque on Route 40 and take the 285 south, you're in the middle of nowhere. It's sand and scrub brush for miles. Take this drive at night, and the darkness is something you've never seen. It's heavy and penetrating and unsettling if you're not used to it. And summer storms in the New Mexico desert are also something unique. Heat lightning can tear through the sky for hours, lighting up the landscape all the way to the horizon. July 1st, 1947 was one of the worst lightning storms in years. That same night, the Army airfield outside of Roswell had been tracking strange radar blips. Same with the nearby White Sands Proving Ground, a missile base that had been testing German V-2 rockets since the end of the war. The nuclear testing facility at the Alamogordo bombing range was also tracking the objects. The blips were moving too fast to be aircraft. Some blips would disappear off the radar screen, then reappear a few seconds later. This was a major concern. The 509th at Roswell was an elite unit, the only unit responsible for deploying atomic weapons. Finally, technicians took the radar equipment apart to check for malfunctions. They couldn't find any. The objects continued to zip around the area for hours. Dan Wilmot and his wife were on their porch watching the lightning storm when a bright oval object zipped over their house and disappeared over the horizon. Moments later, the object streaked over Steve Robinson's truck as he was making deliveries. He tracked the object to the horizon, moving faster than any plane he'd ever seen. Over the next few nights, local sheriff George Wilcox received dozens of calls about objects in the sky. He hadn't seen anything himself, so he told the folks it was probably lightning or planes from the nearby airbase. But then Mac Brazel, a local rancher, came into the office. Mac told the sheriff he had come across a debris field on his ranch in Corona, New Mexico. At first, he thought it was plane wreckage, but the material was like nothing he'd ever seen. He even brought a few pieces to show the sheriff. In the back of Mac's pickup were pieces of metal that looked like aluminum foil, but much thinner. It was also much stronger and lighter. And strangest of all, even though you can bend or crumple the metal, as soon as you released it, it would revert back to its original shape. The sheriff called Roswell Army Airfield just outside of town, and the matter was assigned to an Army intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel. Brazel took Marcel back to the debris site, and the two gathered up more pieces of material from the crashed object. On Tuesday morning, Marcel took the material to the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. Later that day, Walter Haught, the base's public information officer, issued a press release that was picked up by newspapers and radio stations all over the country.
Oh, let me guess. The press release said they denied everything.
Nope. The official United States Army press release said, "We found a UFO."
Yahtzee!
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
The report was national news. It was the biggest story in the country.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week.
But it was only the biggest story for a day. Just a few hours after the news broke, the Army retracted it. Then General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield ordered Major Marcel to personally deliver the wreckage to him in Texas. A few hours after they landed, General Ramey held a press conference where aluminum foil and pieces of wooden debris were spread out in front of photographers and newspapermen. Ramey, with Marcel and Colonel Thomas DuBose backing him up, insisted that the whole UFO thing was a mistake, that the debris was from a weather balloon, and that's all there was to the story. Mac Brazel, the rancher who found the wreckage, also changed his story. He said he regretted coming forward and that the debris was just rubber strips, tinfoil, some paper, and balsa wood. Marcel, in front of the press, backed him up on this and said simply, "We went back to the ranch and found a few more patches of tinfoil and rubber." General Ramey went back to his normal duties and the whole matter was officially dropped. Headlines again spread throughout the country that the flying disc was nothing more than a weather balloon.
Hey, they really took the air out of the story, eh? Eh? Yahtzee.
After that, everyone seemed to move on. The flying saucer craze cooled down, and the country forgot about Roswell.
So that's it?
Oh, not even close. The men at the press conference where the famous photos were taken were men of honor. If they're given orders, they follow them. But as they grew old, they remained men of honor, but there were no more orders to follow. All they had left to follow was their conscience. So these men of honor, they started telling the truth. Dr. Bob Wood was an aerospace engineer with a long and distinguished career. He worked at Sikorsky, Lockheed, Hughes, and McDonnell Douglas. He taught courses at Georgia Tech, UCLA, Caltech, and USC. Dr. Wood was very well known, so it's easy to find his work history, but there is a hole in Dr. Wood's resume from 1968 to 1970. During that time, Wood worked on a secret study for McDonnell Douglas. He was given a huge budget to find out if UFOs were real or not. One of the first people Dr. Wood recruited for this project was a young scientist also working at McDonnell Douglas, Stanton R. Friedman. Friedman was a nuclear physicist by trade, but also dabbled in UFO investigation. At the end of their 18-month study, they determined that UFOs were real and worth investigating. Dr. Wood was invited to present his findings to Congress, but knew this would hurt his career, so he declined. But Dr. Friedman took a different path. After working on the UFO study for McDonnell Douglas, Friedman began giving speeches on the subject to civic groups and scientific organizations. UFOs had become his passion, so he left the aerospace industry, changed his nickname to the Flying Saucer Physicist, and begun investigating UFOs full-time. But even as late as the mid-1970s, Stanton Friedman had never heard of the Roswell incident. In 1978, Friedman heard about it from a television producer. The producer, Bill Allen, told Friedman that he was ham radio buddies with Jesse Marcel. When Friedman learned that Marcel was the intelligence officer at a base that actually handled the wreckage from a UFO crash, Friedman wanted to meet him. And the story of the Roswell incident takes a wild turn.
We found a piece of metal about a 1.5 to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. But the thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it, you couldn't dead it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was.
That doesn't sound like the material from a weather balloon.
They took pictures, of course. They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed, told the newspapers, the newsmen, what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, which we both knew differently.
Jesse Marcel was in charge of intelligence for the only atomic unit in the world. He wasn't going to go against orders. But before he went to the base with the wreckage and received the keep quiet order, he stopped at home first. There he showed the pieces to his wife and his son, Jesse Jr.
The 1942 Buick we had was loaded with stuff in the back seat and in the trunk area. At any rate, he brought the material in and spread it on the kitchen floor and in an effort to try to piece it together.
The pieces weren't just metallic scraps. There was a small I-beam that had some kind of writing on it that Jesse and his father described as hieroglyphics. They even had the piece recreated.
And that's when I saw the writing or the symbols of some sort. I thought at first, this is hieroglyphics or some kind of writing like that. It certainly looked alien to me.
Marcel was extremely familiar with all kinds of aircraft, including top-secret craft being deployed from Roswell Air Base. This wreckage didn't come from anything he recognized.
It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of, because being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that.
Colonel Thomas DuBose, who retired as a brigadier general, was General Ramey's chief of staff. He also posed for pictures at the press conference. He confirmed in multiple interviews that the weather balloon story was a lie.
It was a cover story. The balloon part of it is the story that's to be given to the press, and that is it, and anything else, forget it.
General Clements McMullen in Washington, D.C., called DuBose and gave him 3 orders. 1, get the press off our backs. 2, send some of the wreckage to Washington. And 3, never speak of this again. Not to General Ramey, not to anyone. So he didn't.
As deputy to George Kenney, and he in turn responsible to the president, this is the highest priority you can exist, and you will say nothing, and that's the end of it. And Jesus, that's in the commander-in-chief, and forgot about it.
Stanton Friedman kept interviewing witnesses, kept releasing articles, and kept speaking publicly about Roswell and how he believed it was a cover-up. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the military either said the weather balloon story was true or they said nothing at all. But then in 1993, something very unexpected happened. After a lot of public pressure, the military issued a report about the Roswell incident. It turned out that Friedman was right. The debris showed to the press in 1947, and the whole weather balloon story, the military admitted it was a lie. In October 1993, a U.S. congressman from New Mexico, Stephen Schiff, launched an inquiry into the Roswell incident. Congress directed the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation to uncover any documents they might have. In 1995, the Air Force released its findings in the Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. The report concluded that the material recovered by Jesse Marcel from Mark Brazel's ranch in 1947 was not from a regular weather balloon. The wreckage was actually from a super-secret program called Project Mogul. Project Mogul was a military surveillance program. Balloons equipped with acoustic sensors were launched to high altitudes to listen for the signatures of Russian atomic bomb tests. So why did some of the men at the airbase think this was a UFO? Well, because they were never told about Project Mogul.
To attempt to limit unauthorized disclosure, the Air Force employed a security mechanism known as compartmentation. Compartmentation controlled access to classified information by dispersing portions of the research among several facilities and institutions. Each participating entity received only enough information necessary to accomplish its assigned tasks. In the case of Mogul, only a small circle of Air Force officers received the intimate details that linked together these unrelated research projects.
Okay, but these were highly trained military personnel. They couldn't recognize a surveillance balloon? Well, according to the Air Force report, no, they couldn't.
Although members of the 509th possessed high-level clearances, they were not privy to the existence of Mogul. Their job was to deliver nuclear weapons, not to detect them.
And to be perfectly clear, the investigators found no evidence of a UFO.
The Air Force research found absolutely no indication that what happened near Roswell in 1947 involved any type of extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Is this kind of like when the FBI investigates itself and finds they did nothing wrong? Or the DOJ investigates itself and finds they did nothing wrong?
It's exactly like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the report didn't sit well.
The balloon story sounds like it's full of hot air.
Ugh.
Yeah? Yeah! Okay, sorry, couldn't help it. Go on.
The Air Force said that the wreckage wasn't a flying saucer. They said it was a secret balloon. What they didn't really address was the fact that they lied to the American people and put a bunch of fake balloon wreckage on display for the press. So in 1997, the Air Force issued another report. They had a lot of questions to answer, like what happened to all the records from 1947?
Wait, what do you mean?
Records such as finance and accounting, supplies, buildings and grounds, and other general administrative matters from March 1945 through December 1949, and RAAF outgoing messages from October 1946 through December 1949 were destroyed.
What? Who destroyed the documents? documents?
Well,
The document disposition form did not properly indicate the authority under which the disposal action was taken.
So the records are gone, and nobody knows who did it?
Mm-hmm.
I call bull.
But the question people really wanted to be answered was, what happened to the alien bodies recovered from the second secret crash site?
Wait, another crash? With bodies? My Sharona!
Yes, there have been ET visitation. There have been crashed craft. There have been material and bodies recovered. And there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge.
The first public crash site was a few miles south of Corona, New Mexico. But there was a second crash site. And according to eyewitnesses, whistleblowers, and leaked documents, here's what happened the summer of 1947. In the few months leading up to the Roswell incident, there were over 300 UFO sightings over the New Mexico desert. These were witnessed by local residents and military personnel. On Friday, July 4th, 2 alien ships were flying over Corona, New Mexico. Why they were there is unclear, but best guess is they were surveying White Sands missile range. Back then, White Sands was the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range. It's about 35 miles southeast of Socorro, New Mexico, and was the location of Trinity, the first time the human race deployed a nuclear weapon. That evening, there was an especially violent thunderstorm. Lightning filled the sky. The alien ships, unprepared for and unshielded from lightning, experience an equipment failure. While flying in a tight formation, they collide. Rancher Mac Brazel hears a tremendous thunderclap, but it's different from the rest of the thunder. Others in the area report similar phenomena.
Well, wait, what's that word?
What? Phenomena?
Do-do-do-do-do.
Phenomena.
Do-do-do-do.
Phenomena.
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And you may continue.
At 11:27 p.m., military radar installations all report seeing the objects. Then they pulse and vanish. They suspect a crash. Jim Ragsdale and his friend Trudy are camping in the area. They see a bright flash of light and hear a roaring sound that passes overhead. Then something big strikes the ground nearby. Several archaeologists, including W. Curry Holden, are working a dig near Roswell. They stumble across the impact site where the object has crashed. One of them heads to the closest phone to tell Sheriff George Wilcox they found a crashed aircraft. Wilcox calls the local fire department to alert them about the crash. The site is about 35 miles north of Roswell. The Roswell Fire Department, escorted by members of the Roswell Police Department, respond. These are among the first civilians to visit the impact site. At 5:30 a.m., the military, knowing the approximate location of the saucer crash, move in with a carefully selected team to recover the craft. The soldiers find civilians already on site. The area is secured and the civilians are escorted off. Only those with the highest clearance are allowed near the center of the impact. Guards are posted facing out. The site is cleaned and secured in 6 hours. 5 alien bodies are recovered. The aliens are described the same way by many witnesses. About 4 feet tall, large heads, large eyes, no ears, no nose, only nostrils, and small mouths. They had pale skin. At first, the bodies appeared to be without clothes, but they were actually wearing very tight-fitting suits. The bodies are covered by sheets, then placed in lead-lined body bags. John McBoyle, a reporter for KSWS Radio in Roswell, attempts to access the site. He calls the station and reports seeing a crushed, dishpan-like object and a large military presence. Lydia Sleppy from the parent station in Albuquerque tries to broadcast his report. Sleppy receives a call from the FBI and is ordered not to broadcast. Melvin F. Brown, who is on guard duty at the impact site, has been ordered to not look under the tarp. But the moment that everyone's back is turned, he does. He sees the bodies of the alien flight crew. He described them as small with large heads and pale skin. Nearby, Mac Brazel discovers a large debris field. He heads to the home of his closest neighbors, Floyd and Loretta Proctor. He shows them a little sliver of material that he can neither burn nor cut. The proctor suggests he shows the sheriff. He agrees and gathers pieces of the wreckage and heads home for the night.
I remember he said something about that you could crumple it up and it would not back out.
Military bases along the West Coast put fighters on standby in case more flying discs are seen. Bases in Oregon and Washington have planes equipped with gun cameras. They're put on airborne alert. In Roswell for a conference, C. Bertram Schultz, a paleontologist, sees a large military presence on Highway 285. He doesn't realize until later why so many soldiers were there. Local mortician Glenn Dennis, contracting with the airbase, receives an odd request for small caskets and later encountered unusual debris at the hospital while aiding an injured airman. Dennis is then confronted by officers who tell him he's seen and heard nothing. They say, quote, if he opens his mouth, they will be picking his bones out of the sand.
And he just said, look, mister, you don't go in and start any rumors in Roswell. Nothing happened out here. And he said, if you do, you know, it'd be real serious problems. And so I just, being as my character was at that time, I said, I'm a civilian, you can go to hell. And that's where he said, you may be the one going to hell. And then that's when he really told me, he said, somebody will be picking your bones out of the sand if you do that.
Back at the crash site, the bodies are sealed into a long crate, which is taken to a hangar and left overnight. The crate is guarded by military police who are ordered not to approach it. Melvin Brown is once again standing guard. Brown's commanding officer approaches and says, come on, Brownie, let's have a look inside. But there's nothing to see because everything has been packed and crated ready for shipment. To where, the soldiers have no idea. William Woody and his father try to drive out toward the area where they'd seen the object coming down, but the roads are blocked. The side roads off Highway 285 from Vaughan and to the west are guarded by military police who allow no one to pass. Mac Brazel gets up early and drives to Roswell, about 75 miles away. He stops at the office of Sheriff George A. Wilcox. Wilcox is excited about the find and notifies the military at Roswell Army Airfield. While waiting for the military officers to arrive, Wilcox sends two of his deputies to the ranch. A reporter named Frank Joyce contacts the sheriff's office to inquire about any interesting events. Wilcox directs him to Brazel. Colonel William Blanchard, in charge of the 509th Bomb Group, instructs Air Intelligence Officer Jesse A. Marcel to investigate. Marcel visits the sheriff's office. He interviews Brazel, examines the material, and then decides to visit the ranch himself. Marcel returns to the base, taking some debris with him, and reports his findings to Blanchard. Convinced they have something highly unusual, possibly of Soviet origin, Blanchard alerts his superiors. Marcel comes back to the sheriff's office with counterintelligence agent Captain Sheridan Cavett. They take Brazel back to his ranch and inspect the debris field. Following orders from General Clements McMullen, Blanchard obtains more debris from the sheriff's office. It's sealed and transported to Fort Worth Army Airfield, where Colonel Thomas DuBose receives it for onward transport to Washington, D.C. After Marcel and Cavett leave with Brazel, the two deputies return to say they didn't find the debris field, but they did find a burned area in one of the pastures where sand had been turned to glass and blackened. It looked as if something circular had touched down. At Fort Worth Army Airfield, DuBose and Colonel Alan D. Clark received the debris and prepare to fly it to Washington, D.C. and General McMullen. Because of the distance to the ranch over roads that are less than adequate, Brazel, Marcel, and Cavett don't arrive until after dark. They stay at an old ranch house nearby and wait for daylight. A special flight departs for Andrews Airfield in Washington, D.C. at 2 a.m., carrying the debris and the bodies. Brazel guides two military officers to the crash site. The debris is thin as paper but incredibly sturdy. The metal paper reminds them of tinfoil. They can crumple it, but the metal immediately returns to its original shape. Mac Brazel is becoming inundated with media requests, so Walt Whitmore, Frank Joyce's boss at KGFL, arranges to hide Brazel at his own home. Marcel and Cavett comb the field's perimeter and surrounding areas. They collect debris and at dusk begin the trip back to Roswell. Later in the afternoon, civilian reports come in regarding a second crash site. Lieutenant General Nathan E. Twining is commander of the Air Materiel Command at Wright Field, Ohio. AMC worked closely with industry partners, research labs, and other government agencies to advance aviation technology. The general alters his plans and flies into Alamogordo Army Field. Alamogordo Army Field, also known as Holloman Air Force Base, is located approximately 82 miles southwest of Roswell, New Mexico. A few years later, a film would be leaked from Holloman showing UFOs landing on the base. General Carl Spaatz, commander of all Army Air Forces, tells reporters that he knows nothing about the flying discs or the plans from various local units to search for them. Walt Whitmore Sr., who asked Brazel to stay the night in Roswell at his home, now brings in KGFL News. That evening, the station owner and newsman Judd Roberts records an interview with Brazel. The interview is scheduled to be broadcast the following morning. Roberts didn't know it at the time, but that broadcast would never happen. At 2 a.m., Marcel stops at his house on the way to the base, waking his wife and son. They examine the debris on the kitchen floor, believing it to be a flying saucer. They load it into the car with his son's help. At 6 a.m., Marcel and Cavett inform Blanchard about what they've seen. Blanchard orders guards to secure the debris field, denying access to unauthorized individuals. Blanchard contacts 8th Air Force headquarters, dismissing the possibility of material being from a Soviet device. The message is relayed up the chain of command to SAC headquarters. During a staff meeting at 7:30 a.m., the debris is discussed. Samples of the wreckage are examined, but no one can identify it. The main concern is whether to disclose the discovery to the public. General Ramey proposes a plan to divert attention away from the incident. Walt Whitmore at KGFL receives a phone call from the FCC in Washington. He's told not to air the interview with Mac Brazel. If he does, the station will lose its broadcast license. Later, Senator Dennis Chavez, chairman of the Senate Appropriation Committee, called Whitmore to strongly advise him to do as he was instructed. Blanchard confers with higher headquarters. Jesse Marcel is ordered to Fort Worth. Mac Brazel, the ranch foreman who first discovered the debris field, was arrested and detained by the U.S. Army. He remained in custody for 4 or 5 days. Brazel was denied access to a phone, was given an Army physical, and was subjected to rigorous questioning and intimidation while under arrest. Sheriff Wilcox returns to the crash site with 2 deputies. Military police deny them access. At 11 a.m., Colonel Blanchard announces the recovery of a flying disc. Lieutenant Walter Haught distributes the press release to radio stations and newspapers. At 2:26 p.m., the story hits the AP wire. It reads, "The Army Air Forces here today announced a flying disc had been found. The base receives so many calls that it becomes difficult to access an outside line." 4 minutes after this, at 2:30 p.m., Colonel Blanchard officially goes on leave, though he actually returns to the site to oversee additional cleanup. He deploys techniques learned from the less reported UFO crash that occurred in Missouri in 1941. At 3 p.m., Marcel is told that he's going to Fort Worth with the wreckage. Only a few packages are loaded onto the plane. One, a triangular package about 2 feet long, is wrapped in brown paper. The other 3 are about the size of shoeboxes. They're so light that it feels as if there's nothing in them. The special flight, a B-29, takes off for the Fort Worth Army Airfield. Marcel arrives in Ramey's office with some of the debris. The general wants to see where the debris was found. Marcel accompanies him to the map room. Once Ramey is satisfied, they walk back to the general's office, but the debris is gone. In its place is a ripped-apart weather balloon scattered on the floor. At 4:30 p.m., General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force and Blanchard's supervising officer, presented to the press an alternate story. He claimed the Army had recovered a high-altitude balloon. Warrant Officer Irving Newton is ordered from the weather office at the Fort Worth Army Airfield to Ramey's office. Newton, in front of a small number of reporters and officers, identifies the wreckage on the office floor as a balloon. He is photographed and sent back to his regular duties. The press takes photographs of Jesse Marcel, General Ramey, and Thomas DuBose with the balloon. At 6:17 p.m., the FBI sends a teletype message from the Dallas office to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, telling him that a balloon is responsible for the reports. The message disputes General Ramey's announcement to the press. At 7:30 p.m., the AP breaks the news that the Roswell flying disc was a balloon. Ramey appears on a radio station and confirms this. A few hours later, an unscheduled flight arrives. An officer hands over more sealed boxes of wreckage. At 11:59 p.m., the photographs are transmitted to New York for wide distribution. But a small hiccup in the official story. During the entire process, Ramey held a memo in his right hand. In the photos, the text is very blurry. But by the early 2000s, software had improved to the point that enhancing the memo became feasible. But to do this, you'd need the original negatives right from the camera, if they still existed. Well, Stanton Friedman looked into this, and it turned out the negatives did still exist. So he bought them and had them analyzed.
Can you read the words?
Most of the words, yes.
What's it say? Does it mention a spaceship?
It sure does. Stanton Friedman spent a lot of money to recover the original photographic negatives from the press conference where the weather balloon was made public. The negatives and prints made from them were subjected to multiple levels of analysis. In at least one of the photographs, the front face of the memo is clearly visible. Early analysis showed that there were several words that could be deciphered which had electrifying implications. The words urgent, victims, wreck, and the name of Air Force General Hoyt Vandenberg came through very clearly. Also references to a disc to be shipped by B-29, which did happen. The message then seems to imply that they should misstate the meaning of the story. It then suggests sending out public relations officers with weather balloons, that this would work if photos were used and demonstrated to the press. It did work. Morning newspapers report that the flying saucer near Roswell is a weather device. Second site cleanup resumes at sunrise to ensure civilians don't stumble upon the airfield. At 8 a.m., members of the 1st Air Transport Unit load crates into C-54s. Armed guards watch as 3 or 4 aircraft are loaded for transport to Kirtland Air Base and then on to Los Alamos. Los Alamos was, and might still be, the most secure military facility in the world. Colonel Blanchard personally takes Haught to Building 84, Hangar P3, which is heavily guarded both inside and out. Inside, Haught observes the recently recovered object, 12 to 15 feet long, 6 feet high, resembling an egg with a metallic surface. No windows, portholes, wings, tail section, or landing gear were visible. He sees a couple of bodies under a canvas tarp. They have large heads and are child-sized.
There's been so much that has been brought forth by legitimate people that there had to be something to it, and apparently that's what it was. It's something that crash landed out there in the desert. I'm a firm believer.
More wreckage arrives at the base, boxed into crates of various sizes and shapes. At noon, a crate guarded by MPs is moved to bomb pit number 1. It's unusual for anything other than weapons to be stored there. In Roswell, Floyd Proctor and Lyman Strickland spot Mac Brazel escorted by military officers, ignoring their attempts to communicate, which is strange. Photographer Robin Adair receives a call from the main office in New York, instructing him to head to Roswell immediately. He flies over the sites. He sees troops, vehicles, and military police covering large areas. A sealed, unmarked wooden crate is brought out and loaded into a B-29, tail number 7301, bound for Fort Worth. It's guarded by 6 armed MPs, never allowing it out of their sight. Under military escort, Mac Brazel is taken to the offices of the Roswell Daily Record, where he provides reporters with a news story. Later, reporter Frank Joyce points out that this news story is much different than his original account. Brazel responds that it would be bad for him if he didn't tell the news story. At 8 p.m., the B-29 flight crew is back. Again, they were not debriefed, but are told that they have flown the general's furniture to Fort Worth. They are cautioned not to tell anyone, including their families, about the flight. As far as anyone is concerned, the flight never happened. At the debris field and impact site, cleanup is intense. No debris remains, and there's no sign they were ever there. Military personnel return to Sheriff Wilcox's office and ask for a box of debris that he'd been storing. Wilcox surrenders it without protest. The debriefings of all witnesses are underway. Participants are taken into a room in small groups and told that the recovery is a highly classified event. Everyone is to forget that it ever happened. The military warns civilians around Roswell that they can never talk about what happened. In some cases, the witnesses are threatened with death should they ever speak to anyone. Over the next few years, the military continued to search for and even find more debris from the crash sites, but they stonewalled long enough that the public lost interest. Roswell was still talked about in local UFO groups and zines, but those were considered fringe. But in 1978, Stanton Friedman brought the Roswell incident to the mainstream. In 1980, Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz...
Oh, the language guy?
Yep, that guy.
Yeah.
They wrote the Roswell incident, which sold a lot of copies. Roswell was covered on TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries and In Search Of, and later was featured prominently on The X-Files. By the 1990s, everyone had heard of Roswell, which forced the Air Force to release that report in 1995. This brings us back to the second Air Force report released in 1997. And in this report, we finally learn what happened to the bodies. In 1997, the Air Force released another report about Roswell. It was called the Roswell Report, Case Closed. This report rehashed the Project Mogul balloon explanation of the wreckage. It spent some time trying to discredit witnesses and UFO investigators. And it explained why there were eyewitness reports of bodies. The Air Force said these recovered alien bodies were actually crash test dummies used in high-altitude parachute tests.
Oh, this is gonna be good.
The project was codenamed Operation High Dive. High Dive dropped hundreds of dummies from various heights to see what kind of falls could be survivable.
So the aliens everyone saw were dummies?
That's the word.
So they used 4-foot-tall dummies with big heads, huh?
Nope. The dummies were 6 feet tall, but some were discovered burned, so their limbs were shorter. Or they were damaged.
Damage to the dummies included loss of heads, arms, legs, and fingers. This detail, dummies with missing fingers, appears to satisfy another element of the research profile, aliens with only 4 fingers.
I think the real dummies are the people who wrote this report.
Yeah, I would agree that this is not as satisfying an explanation as the Air Force thinks it is.
Okay. Let's say the Air Force is telling the truth, which they're not, but let's just say they really dropped dummies all over the desert.
Okay.
And these dummies were confused with, I can't believe I'm even saying it, the dummies were confused with 4-foot-tall aliens.
Right.
Why not just tell us that in the other report?
Oh, because Operation High Jump, the super-secret high-altitude dummy-dropping project, it didn't start until 1953, 6 years after the Roswell crash.
Is this a joke?
Nope.
They're talking about 1947. Well, you're talking about dummies used in the 50s, almost a decade later.
Well, I'm afraid that's the problem that we have with time compression.
Oh, did he say time compression?
Yeah, that's Air Force speak for people got the dates wrong.
Are you punking me? Well, what is this?
The report even quotes an eyewitness named Gerald Anderson who found bodies that he said looked like plastic dolls.
Credible witness?
Well, I don't know. Maybe Gerald was a very intelligent and observant 5-year-old. Precocious, I think they call it.
They quoted a 5-year-old witness?
They did. But to be fair, Gerald was 55 when they interviewed him.
Okay, let me get this straight. They interview a 55-year-old man who tells them what he saw 50 years ago when he was 5?
That's right.
Geez, I haven't seen an investigation this sloppy since, since every FBI investigation in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it wasn't convincing. This is a common government CYA technique. You assert the outcome, then you have your team of investigators and experts fill in the details that eventually arrive at your desired outcome, no matter how ridiculous the details are.
Oh, you mean like a bat kebab from a wet market in the middle of nowhere?
Well, that theory's still being debated.
Yeah.
Let's stay focused. Now, it's only fair that we present all sides of the Roswell story. Now, the timeline I went through earlier is all from witness accounts and sworn affidavits. There are a lot of accounts that I didn't cover because I couldn't corroborate them. But even the witness reports I did cover aren't perfect. I've seen videos and books and articles say that there are as many as 600 eyewitnesses who've come forward saying they saw ships and debris and bodies. Now, maybe that's true, but I can only find 7. Almost every witness account comes from a friend or a spouse or a child or a grandchild of a witness. And other witnesses have had trouble with their stories. Loretta Proctor, who saw the debris when Mac Brazel brought it to her house, said they couldn't burn the metal. They tried bending it and cutting it and they couldn't do it. That's a new story. Her earlier story mentions nothing about debris. In fact, she specifically said she never saw debris of any kind. Lydia Sleppy was the teletype operator who claimed the FBI interrupted her broadcast and ordered her to stop. and there's no evidence of this at all.
Oh, yeah, but a lot of evidence has disappeared in this case.
That's true, but I still would have liked to have seen a memo about the broadcast, and it's just not there. Melvin Brown was the guard who said he saw bodies on 2 different occasions, once at the crash site and once while guarding the hangar. The truth is, his story comes from his daughter Beverly, who only mentioned Roswell many years after her father died.
Oh, it doesn't mean it's not true. He was guarding something.
Yeah, but he wasn't a guard. He was a cook.
Oh. Cooks don't guard top secret military facilities?
No.
But they probably kept the aliens frozen, right? So he was probably guarding a freezer in the kitchen.
Remember I said it's a government technique to start with an outcome, then try to find facts to fit? That's that.
Yeah, I'll chalk this one up to a maybe.
Major Jesse Marcel is one of my favorite witnesses, but take his story with a whole lot of salt. He used to exaggerate his military record quite a bit. He overstated his commendations, his rank, and his credentials. He claimed he was a pilot and shot down 5 enemy aircraft. He even said he flew the UFO wreckage himself. But Marcel wasn't a pilot. There's an evaluation report from General Ramey himself who said Marcel was a competent officer, but, quote, since this officer is not a rated pilot, his assumption of the position of commanding general is not a consideration. Marcel was an intelligence officer. Before that, an administrative assistant. And before that, a photo interpretation and visual aids officer. He never flew. He also didn't have a degree in physics, which he had claimed during some interviews. In 2020, Marcel's grandchildren supposedly found his diary where he documented everything he saw. This was both exciting and suspicious. Marcel gave interviews for 20 years and never mentioned a diary. Turned out he didn't write it, and we don't know who did, so his story just got messier. Colonel Thomas DuBose was one of the men photographed with Marcel with the weather balloon. Not only did DuBose say the wreckage was not switched, but he would get pretty annoyed when asked about it. He said the wreckage in the photos is the same wreckage that Marcel brought from Roswell. Glenn Dennis, the mortician, gets a lot of things wrong. And I left out most of his testimony because a big piece of his story is how he had a friend who was a nurse on the base. They had lunch one day, she showed him a drawing of an alien body. Then she ended up dead. But this never happened. Then there's Walter Haught, the public relations officer who saw the craft and the bodies. He gave a sworn affidavit to be released after his death, signed and witnessed by a notary, and given after a doctor pronounced him of sound mind. A lot of the Roswell story comes from his affidavit that he gave in 2002. But he was interviewed in 2000, and he had trouble remembering everything. His affidavit, however, was clear and detailed. Turns out the affidavit was written by a UFO author based on interviews with Haught. Haught reviewed it, didn't make any changes, and signed it. Now, does that mean the affidavit is wrong? No, it could be 100% true. But in every story about Roswell, it's presented as Haught's words when it was not. It's very possible that when he signed the document, he didn't understand what it was. But I've seen the interviews with him, and he did say everything was true. So he's a tricky one. Colonel Blanchard did go on leave right after the crash, but he didn't oversee any cleanup operation. He went on a 2-week vacation with his wife to Santa Fe. Sure, these records could have been falsified, but there's proof that he was with the governor during this time. So a lot of witnesses do change their story over time, and that's to be expected. It's 50, 60, 70 years. But true believers cherry-pick the best stories and throw away all the rest. The truth is, we will never really know what happened in Roswell in 1947. The records are gone, the witnesses are dead, and with all due respect to UFO researchers, they only write one side of the story.
Skepticism doesn't sell.
It doesn't. I believe something did happen out there, but whether it was a secret military program or an alien crash site, I can't be sure.
Well, this turned out to be a downer.
But
go on.
In 2013, a document was found in the FBI archives. It's written by Guy Hoddle, special agent in charge of the Washington office. It's dated March 22nd, 1950, and the title is Information Concerning Flying Saucers.
An investigator for the Air Forces stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture.
That was sent to J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, who declined to pursue it, which leads to one final twist to the Roswell story. And it's a twist that needs its own video. And if you want me to cover it, let me know. In 1972, a witness came forward with new information. Information that was always hinted at, but now we have a lot more details. Turns out, one of the aliens recovered from Roswell stayed in Los Alamos until 1952.
In the freezer?
No, he was alive. And he had a lot to say. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. My name is AJ. On the line is Hecklefish.
On the line. You could have at least put me on Zoom. Oh, hey, let me ask you.
What?
Are you wearing those orange glasses?
I am.
You look like a Walmart Robert Downey Jr.
This has been a Y-Files compilation episode. I hope you had fun, learned something new, maybe revisited some old favorites. Maybe some of these were brand new to you. Either way, I appreciate you checking it out. Now, a few plugs. Remember, the Y-Files is also a podcast. Twice a week, I post new episodes on the Y-Files podcast. It's called Y-Files Operation Podcast. I don't have my teleprompter or my script, so I'm kind of just winging it. You can see how sloppy I am without the script. I got the bullet points. I'm doing my best. It's the Y-Files Operation Podcast. Every week, 2 episodes. One of them is just the audio version of the show that you see on YouTube. But the second is a deep dive into one of the topics we cover on YouTube, or it's a topic that we can't cover on YouTube because of whatever reason. Those are called Unredacted. Now, special thanks to our patrons who make all this possible. I could not do this without you guys. Every episode is dedicated to you, especially the compilations, because it's terrifying taking a month off. The algorithm is going to punish me. It has already begun, but we're going to take a break every year for 1 month. But during that month, 3 of the weeks are working weeks. So we'll be creating new content, and there's new content coming in 2 weeks, and we're starting with a banger. We're starting with a very fun episode about Mars. So this and that are dedicated to the patrons. Now, if you'd like to support the channel, we'd appreciate it. For as little as $3 a month, you can become a Patreon member. You get access to episodes early without commercials, merch that's only available to members, and you get 2 live streams every week just for you. And I believe, even though we're technically off, Patreon members are going to get live streams this month. I may be wrong about that, but if I am, I'll make sure that I'm streaming for Patreon members. Another great way is grab something from the Y-Files store.
Grab a Hecklefish t-shirt, or a fistful of coffee mug, or a hoodie, or squeezies. Look, the bit isn't as funny if you can't see me.
And those are the plugs. I will see you next week with another compilation, and in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Until then, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated, because you are.
In Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, so I'm singing it like I should. But then another conspiracy theory becomes the truth, my friends, and it never ends. No, it never ends. I feel the crap cat and got stuck inside Mel's hole with MK Ultra. I'm being only too aware. Did Stanley Kubrick fake the moon landing alone on a film set, or were the shadow people there? The Roswell aliens just fought the smiling man, I'm told, and his name was Cold. And I can't believe I'm dancing with the fish. Hecklefish on Thursday nights with AJ2, and the Wi-Fi's have the beat all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's have the beat all through the night. The Mothman sightings and the solar storm still come to Agatha, the secret city underground. Mysterious number stations, planet Serpo 2, Project Stargate, and what the Dark Watchers found. We're in a simulation, don't you worry though. The Black Knight satellite, it told me so. I can't believe